Hello friends, about of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. My name is Ethan Hayes. I'm 42, and let me tell you, life's been kicking my ass lately. Nasty divorce, my 19-year-old daughter Maya barely speaking to me. I needed to get away, find some peace, maybe even a little redemption. That's how I ended up in Chaco Canyon, this remote, dusty corner of New Mexico in the ass end of the summer of 2023. Just me, my beat-up old RV, and my German Shepherd Rex. He's been my rock through all the shit, loyal as hell, and the only one I felt I could really trust. My plan: get lost in the desert, stare at some ancient ruins, feel small and quiet for a while. I figured I'd deal with the usual crap: dirt roads, spotty cell service, maybe a rattler or two. What I didn't plan on was picking up a hitchhiker, and I sure as hell wasn't prepared for what was waiting for me in that godforsaken canyon. But, you know, fate has a way of sneaking up on you when you're desperate for a little peace and quiet. I first saw her on the side of this two-lane highway that was practically empty. She was standing next to a broken-down pickup, hair whipping around her face in the wind. I could see the engine smoking from a mile away. Now, I'm not usually one to stop for strangers, but there was something about the look on her face, a mix of "I'm screwed" and straight-up fear, that got to me. I pulled the RV onto the gravel shoulder, and Rex barked. He didn't usually bark at people, unless they were right up on the windows. The fact that he barked just seeing her should have been my first clue that something was off. This chick, who I later learned was named Sarah, was on the petite side, maybe mid-30s, with tan skin and these dark eyes that kept flickering between "thanks" and "I don't trust you." She told me she was a photographer, here to document the ruins. Said the truck belonged to a friend who'd bailed on her. She needed a ride into the canyon, or at least somewhere with a damn phone signal. Against my better judgment, I let her in. I mean, what was I gonna do? Leave her out there to bake in the sun? But as soon as I pulled back onto the road, Rex started growling low in his throat, like he was trying to tell me something wasn't right. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just anxious being cooped up with a stranger. Sarah, for her part, tried to act calm, but she kept drumming her fingers on her camera bag like she was about to bolt. We made small talk, but every time I asked about this friend of hers, she changed the subject faster than a politician dodging a scandal. She did, however, talk about wanting to take pictures of these ancient petroglyphs deep in the canyon, spots she called sacred. That word, sacred, kept popping up, and I started to wonder just how genuine her interest really was. We finally hit this rough dirt road that led down into Chaco Canyon. The sun was setting, painting everything in these crazy reds and golds. Beautiful, but also kinda eerie. I found a flat spot near some old ruins to park the RV. The place was isolated, no official campsites for miles, not another soul in sight. Exactly what I was looking for. But as soon as I killed the engine, I heard this dripping sound. I got out, crawled under the RV, and sure enough, my worst fear was confirmed. Fuel leak. My tank was draining, slowly but surely. I cursed up a storm, rigged up a pathetic patch with some duct tape and an old rag, and prayed it would hold. We were gonna have to be careful with any driving. We were stuck until morning at the very least. Sarah offered to help pay for repairs, but the nearest shop was probably a good 3 hours away, and with no cell service, calling for help was out of the question. She seemed really uneasy, kept looking out the windows like she was expecting someone, or something, to appear out of the darkness. I set up a small fire pit away from the RV, boiled some water for instant coffee, and tried to relax. Rex lay at my feet, but he kept glancing past the fire, ears perked, like he heard something I couldn't. I asked Sarah if she wanted to sleep in the RV or set up her tent. She said she'd stay in the RV's passenger seat, claimed she wanted to stargaze through the windshield. I noticed she kept a small knife tucked in her jacket. I couldn't blame her, being stuck out here with a stranger, but something about the way she held herself felt more like a predator than someone scared. Night fell fast. The silence out there was suffocating, so quiet that my own heartbeat sounded loud as hell. That's when I saw them, fresh footprints around our campsite, big ones deep in the dirt, like some large animal had been circling us. Too big for a coyote, too narrow for a bear, maybe a mountain lion, whatever it was. The hair on Rex's neck stood up as soon as I shined my flashlight on them. He let out a low growl, and a chill went down my spine. At one point, I stepped away from the fire to take a leak, and that's when I saw it, a figure on a nearby ridge, silhouetted against the moonlight. It looked like a coyote, but it was standing on 2 legs. It moved all jerky, then bounded away so fast I could barely track it. I flicked my flashlight in that direction, but it was gone. I went back to the RV, heart pounding. Sarah was inside, rummaging through her camera bag, breathing hard like she'd been running. I asked if she saw anything. She just shook her head and said, "We need to stay inside. Keep watch." Her voice cracked. I brought Rex inside, locked the doors, and tried to sleep. Every time I started to drift off, Rex would growl or whimper, so my brain never really shut down. By sunrise, I was exhausted and more than a little freaked out. Sarah was already awake, pacing back and forth in the tiny aisle of the RV. "We should go deeper into the canyon," she said. "There's better shelter near the big ruins. We can hide from—" She caught herself, then just pointed towards the horizon. "We'll get better photos, too." Something didn't add up. Why was she so eager to move deeper into the middle of nowhere instead of getting the hell out? But I didn't have a better plan. And with that damn fuel leak, I couldn't drive out without risking running out of gas in the middle of nowhere. We decided to move further in, hoping we'd find a higher spot or maybe a sign of other campers. As we navigated the rutted dirt roads, we passed this small ranch. There were a few guys standing by a fence, wearing cowboy hats and carrying rifles. One of them whistled for us to stop, so I slowed down, cautious. Rex started barking like crazy, hackles raised. The guy who walked up to my window was tall, maybe mid-50s, with these piercing gray eyes. "While lost?" he asked. His voice was friendly enough, but there was this tension in his expression. Another guy stood behind him, gripping a shotgun. Just camping, I said, trying to keep it simple. Had some vehicle trouble. The tall guy shook his head. This is private property out here. Folks don't take kindly to strangers poking around. He glanced at Sarah, then back at me. We've had incidents. People going missing. Might be best you move on. I tried to assure him we'd stay clear of their land, just passing through, but he just stared at Sarah for a second, and she looked away, refusing to meet his gaze. I noticed his hand tighten on his rifle. He leaned in and whispered, "Nothing but trouble out here. If you know what's good for you, you'll leave the canyon." I thanked him and eased the RV forward, feeling their eyes burning into my back as we drove away. Once we were out of earshot, Sarah finally exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath the whole time. She refused to talk about it, just said, "We can't trust them." I wanted to ask why, but the way she said it made it clear she wasn't going to elaborate. We found another spot in the shadow of this towering sandstone formation. I parked, hopped out to check the fuel leak, and found it had gotten worse. We were losing gas fast. No way we were driving out of here without patching it properly or siphoning some extra fuel from somewhere. That's when a new fear set in. We were effectively trapped. Rex bounded out to sniff around, returning every so often with his tail low. He seemed restless, and so was I. Sarah was studying her camera equipment, occasionally scribbling notes in this small journal she had. She had this intense focus I couldn't quite place. Was it fear, or was it fascination? That afternoon, a sudden movement to the north caught my eye. I grabbed my binoculars and saw a group of at least 4 men trudging through the desert, heading in our direction. They had guns strapped to their backs. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but they moved like they knew exactly where they were going. Sarah cursed under her breath and told me to hide. We doused the fire and ducked into the RV, peeking through the blinds. The men skirted around our campsite, never coming within earshot. As soon as they were gone, Sarah let out a sigh of relief. "You know them?" I asked. She just shook her head. "They're dangerous. I've seen them before. Near some of the older ruins. Looters, maybe." Her words were guarded, but her body language screamed that she was holding something back. We stayed put as night fell again. This time, Rex refused to settle down inside the RV. He paced and stared at the windows, ears perked, like he was on high alert. Around midnight, I heard footsteps crunching outside. I grabbed my rifle, motioned for Sarah to stay quiet. The footsteps circled the RV, and a flashlight beam swept through the windows. Someone rattled the door handle. My heart was hammering in my chest. Rex was barking in that low, ferocious way he has when he means business. I flung the door open, rifle raised, and for a moment, I caught the outline of a man with a bandana over his face. He froze, then bolted as I fired a warning shot into the air. There were more of them. At least 3 shadows fleeing into the darkness. When I turned back to Sarah, she was shaking. "They found me," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "They think I have something they want." I demanded an explanation, and that's when she finally came clean, sort of. She admitted to taking photos at restricted archaeological sites. Said she stumbled upon a group smuggling artifacts out of the canyon. valuable stuff for the black market. She hinted that she might have taken something, maybe by accident, maybe not. She mumbled something about an old amulet, but her words were all jumbled up with fear. Her story kept shifting like sand in the wind, but the gist of it was this. She'd ripped off these guys, and now they were after her. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to kick her out, leave her to these goons. But I couldn't just abandon someone, not even her, to a pack of armed criminals in the middle of nowhere. Besides, I needed to focus on the immediate threat. We decided to pack up and push further into the canyon, hoping to find a higher vantage point to call for help, or at least put some distance between us and those men. We set off at daybreak. The desert air was harsh and still, offering no relief from the scorching sun. I took every back route I could remember from past visits, but I was still losing fuel. Then we saw them, the same men from last night. They'd cornered us on a narrow dirt track. Their dusty SUV blocked the path, and two of them stood behind open doors, rifles pointed right at us. I slammed on the brakes, nearly throwing Rex off balance. They surrounded us, yanked open the doors, and ordered us out. Sarah and I exchanged terrified glances before stepping down. One of them slammed my face into the side of the RV, disarming me. Rex was going nuts, lunging, but another guy pinned his muzzle closed with a loop of rope. The big guy in charge had a black bandana around his neck. His eyes darted between Sarah and me. "You have something that belongs to us," said to Sarah. "Hand it over now." She stammered, "I don't." He slapped her, hard enough to knock her to the ground. "Don't lie. You stole from our cache. You think we wouldn't find out?" I tried to protest, but someone shoved a rifle barrel into my ribs. I was certain they were going to kill us both right there. My mind was racing, scrambling for any kind of plan. But then Sarah spoke. "Okay," she said, her voice shaky. "I'll lead you to it. Just don't hurt him or the dog." They forced us into the back of their SUV. Rex was half choked by the rope, and it tore me up to see him whimpering in pain. They drove us to a more secluded spot in the canyon, where ancient stone walls rose up like monoliths. A half-collapsed structure lay at the base of a plateau. We were hauled out of the vehicle, wrists bound. One man stayed behind, presumably to guard the SUV, while the others marched us into the ruins. Inside the dim, ancient structure, the air smelled of dust and something else, something faintly rotten. Sarah muttered directions, leading us to a partially blocked room. She claimed the artifact was in there. The men forced me to wait outside with one guard, while Sarah crawled through the rubble with the others. Moments later, I heard shouts, then a scream. The guard tensed, leaving me alone for a split second to check on the commotion. I seized the opportunity. I used the sharp edge of a broken stone to saw at the plastic ties around my wrists. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought it would give me away. After what felt like an eternity, my wrists came free. The guard came rushing back into view, raising his gun, but I tackled him before he could fire. We struggled, rolling across the ground. I managed to elbow him in the throat, then smacked his head against the stone. He went limp. My knuckles were bleeding, but I didn't feel any pain, just pure adrenaline. I grabbed his rifle and crept towards the sounds of chaos deeper in the ruin. I found them in a side chamber, illuminated by a few flashlights. The men were screaming at each other, weapons drawn, but something else had joined them. It stood in the far corner, half hidden by shadows. Its eyes reflected the flashlight beams like two glowing orbs. The stench of rotting flesh rolled through the air. It had a coyote's face, but it was too elongated, and its limbs were twisted in ways that just weren't natural. It let out this guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the walls. Then it moved, with unnatural speed, launching itself at one of the men's throats. Blood sprayed across the stone floor. The other men shouted, firing blindly. The gunshots echoing, dust filling the room. I ducked behind a fallen pillar, frantically scanning for Sarah. I saw her near the back, crouched against the wall, eyes wide. She was clutching her camera bag, hands trembling. The shape Skinwalker, demon. I didn't know what pounced on the second man, savaging him before leaping to the ceiling. It clung there, snarling and hissing. The leader, the guy with the black bandana, fired a shotgun blast, but the thing just leaped away, climbing onto the collapsed rafters above. In that brief moment of confusion, I ran to Sarah, grabbed her arm, and yanked her through a side exit. We sprinted through a dark corridor, half choked with dust. We didn't stop until we reached the outside, where we collapsed, gasping for air. I found Rex tied up near the SUV, whimpering. I freed him, stroking his fur, checking for injuries. His muzzle was raw, but he seemed otherwise okay. That's when I noticed the SUV keys were still in the ignition. Those guys had been too confident, too rushed, or maybe they wanted a quick getaway. But the vehicle was blocked by boulders, the same ones that the men had used to hide from plain sight. We weren't driving anywhere in that thing. The only option was to run. As we prepared to flee on foot, gunshots rang out again from inside the ruins, followed by a terrifying scream that cut off abruptly. Then everything fell silent. I had no intention of sticking around to find out who had survived. Lena and I bolted, Dakota at our side, deeper into the canyon. The towering cliffs seemed to close in, and the midday sun was scorching. My mouth felt like sandpaper, my limbs heavy. We pressed on until we found a rocky overhang that offered a sliver of shade. Catching our breath, I turned to Lena. What the hell was that thing? She looked haunted. I studied local legends for my research. People call it a skinwalker, a shapeshifter. Most say it's just a myth. Her eyes brimmed with tears. But I've heard stories of people disappearing here. I was so focused on finding artifacts that I forgot the warnings. I should have been furious, but fear was stronger than anger at this point. She had lied about so much, yet we needed each other. We huddled in the shade, checking the supplies from Lena's bag, a half-empty water bottle, some protein bars, and her camera. No sign of the amulet she supposedly stole. I demanded to know where it was, and she finally produced it from an inner pocket. A small, carved stone figure bound in leather straps, its facial features worn down by time. I could sense an unsettling energy just by looking at it. She admitted that she and a partner found it hidden in the ruins. Her partner disappeared soon after, and she suspected these men, looters, had something to do with it, or maybe the creature itself. She'd been on the run ever since. That explained the tension, the men chasing her, but it didn't explain why I had to be dragged into this nightmare. As dusk approached, the desert cooled rapidly. We decided to head back to my RV, uncertain if the route was safe. We stuck to ravines, avoiding open areas. At one point, I glanced up at the ridge and saw that same silhouette coyote, but standing on two legs, staring down at us. My blood ran cold. It tilted its head, then vanished. When we reached my RV, the sight was devastating. The doors were wide open, windows smashed, supplies strewn around the sand. The men must have ransacked it, looking for Lena or the artifact. I cursed, rummaging through the wreckage. The fuel tank was slashed, all the gas drained. We had no vehicle, no phone, and minimal supplies. We were miles from any help, with at least one monstrous creature stalking us, and a group of violent men in the area, if any of them were still alive. I barricaded the RV door as best I could, but it was basically wrecked. Lena insisted we find a safer place to hide for the night, but I wanted to gather anything useful first. That's when I heard something, a faint whisper that seemed to echo in the darkness. It sounded like my name, Ali. My heart hammered. I shone a flashlight into the blackness and saw nothing, but Dakota whined, pressing herself against my leg, hackles raised. Lena and I took stock: a bit of dried food, a jug of water, a first aid kit, and my rifle, still loaded. We had enough to last maybe 2 or 3 days if we were careful. Then we heard an engine. Headlights illuminated the canyon walls. A battered truck rumbled closer. We hid behind the RV, hearts pounding, but the truck stopped a few hundred yards away. A single figure stepped out. I recognized him as one of the ranchers who had warned us earlier. He called out, "You folks there? If you are, come on out." His tone was laced with unease. I stepped forward, rifle in hand but lowered. He looked me up and down, saw the chaos, heard gunshots, figured you might need a hand. Before I could respond, something moved at the edge of the flashlight beam, a blur of fur and twisted limbs. The rancher must have seen it too, because he aimed his rifle. He fired a shot, the muzzle flash lighting up the night for a split second. I glimpsed the creature, a coyote's face, warped with anger, red eyes shining, then it was gone. The rancher swore. "That's no normal coyote," he muttered. "Some say it's a skinwalker. Others say demon. I don't care, but I know it kills." He offered to help us, told us to get in his truck quickly. Lena climbed into the passenger seat. Dakota jumped in the back, and I slid in next to her. The rancher, who said his name was Wade, sped off. He said his buddy wouldn't have let us go, but he couldn't just leave us out here to die. He'd come alone, which seemed like a dangerous move, but I was grateful nonetheless. After a few miles, we rounded a bend and saw a pair of headlights shining at us. Another truck blocked the road, the same group that had kidnapped us. They jumped out, guns drawn. Wade slammed on the brakes, cursing. We were outnumbered. One of the men stormed over, pointing a rifle at the windshield. "Hand over Lena and that artifact, or none of you leave here alive." I raised my hands. Wade gripped the steering wheel, eyes wide. Lena bit her lip, her hand moving toward the small knife she still carried. Then Dakota let out a sudden growl, teeth bared. The man at the truck's hood smirked. You think that dog is going to save you? He motioned for us to get out. As we stepped out, a chilling wind swept the desert floor, carrying with it a low, almost human whine. The men froze. A figure appeared on top of a nearby rock outcrop, backlit by the moon. It made a series of clicks and howls that raised every hair on my body. The man with the rifle fired. The shape vanished. Then, out of the darkness, it came, bounding closer, impossibly fast. The men scattered, some firing their guns blindly. Wade shouted at me and Lena to get down. We dived behind the truck. Dakota snarled at the swirling dust, barking furiously. The creature leaped among the armed men, picking them off one by one with horrifying speed. Screams filled the air, mingling with the roars of gunfire. I saw muzzle flashes, then heard gurgled cries. By the time I dared to look again, blood smeared the ground, and the monster was standing over two bodies, its muzzle slick with red. That was our chance to escape, but in the panic, Lena had hesitated. She stared at the carnage, clutching the amulet to her chest. Wade tugged at her arm, yelling, "We have to go." She blinked, nodded, and we all scrambled into his truck. The tires spat gravel as we tore away, the creature's howl echoing behind us. Half an hour later, we were miles away, near the rancher's homestead. But as we pulled into his yard, floodlights revealing dusty corals and a weathered barn, Wade suddenly turned on Lena. "Give me the amulet," he drawled. "I know what you found out there." My stomach dropped. This was another betrayal. Lena clutched the artifact, refusing. Wade cocked the rifle, his hand trembling. "You don't understand," he said. "This thing is cursed or haunted or God knows what. We've lost people to that canyon. Whatever devil's out there, this amulet is part of it. Hand it over." "I'm taking it back where it belongs." Lena shook her head. "It's worth a fortune," she said. Her greed, or maybe desperation, was getting the better of her. "We can sell it. Buy a way out of this place." He pressed the barrel to her chest. "That thing doesn't belong to you or me, or any white man's museum. Give it back now." Before I could intervene, Lena lunged for his rifle. A shot fired into the night. Dakota barked, and in the confusion, Lena spun away from the truck. With a single glance at me, she took off, amulet in hand, fading into the darkness of the ranch yard. Wade turned to me, fury in his eyes. "If she doesn't return that thing, that skinwalker will hunt us all down." He hopped out of the truck, scanning the darkness with his flashlight. I stayed put, uncertain. Dakota whined, restless. I realized that no matter what happened, that amulet needed to be taken away from here, returned, destroyed, anything to end this cycle of violence. I grabbed my rifle and followed. We combed the ranch yard, calling out Sarah's name. Nothing. The night was silent except for our ragged breathing and the distant howl of coyotes, or something that sounded like coyotes. Suddenly, a horrifying scream pierced the air. It came from behind the barn. We sprinted over, rifles ready. There, lying on the ground, was Sarah's camera bag, torn open, her camera smashed. No sign of Sarah herself. Blood stained the dirt. Tracks led away into the open desert. Whether it was from the men or the creature, I couldn't tell. She was simply gone. Wade knelt by the blood, muttering curses. I kept expecting the skinwalker to appear, but everything was still, almost eerily so. Did it take her? Did she run? I'll never know for sure. Part of me wonders if it was the men from earlier, or if she staged something, but the blood was real enough, and the bag was slashed by claws or a blade. We spent the rest of the night barricaded in Wade's house, all the lights on, rifles loaded. But nothing came. By dawn, Wade said I should get going. He offered me a spare can of gas and the chance to patch up my RV, but I decided I'd had enough of this cursed place. I thanked him for his help, though I was wary he could turn on me again, and drove his truck back to my RV, Rex in the passenger seat. The RV was still in ruins, but with the gas can and some more patches, I managed to make it operational enough to limp to the nearest town. The entire drive out, I felt like something was watching me. When I stopped for a break, I heard my name whispered on the wind. Ethan. I shook my head, trying to write it off as a trick of my imagination. Rex stuck close, not even wanting to wander off to sniff around. Eventually, I found myself on a paved road again, far from the canyon. The relief was palpable, but my mind kept returning to those horrors, the savage men, the twisted figure, the idea of a curse-laden amulet, and of course, Sarah's disappearance, swallowed up by the desert night. Could she have survived? Did the skinwalker mark me somehow? I may never know. When I finally reached a small service station, I parked, stepped out, and collapsed onto the asphalt, tears in my eyes. Rex licked my face gently. A mechanic came over, asked if I was okay. I just nodded and gestured to the RV. The man looked at my battered vehicle and my haunted eyes and seemed to realize something terrible had gone down. He didn't press for details, just offered me water and said he could make some quick repairs if I had the cash. While he worked, I leaned against the RV, feeling the sun on my back. I thought about my daughter Maya, how I'd let my life drift so far from hers. Maybe this was a wake-up call to reconcile. Life is too fragile, too easily torn apart by both real and unimaginable horrors, to waste any more time on grudges or regrets. That's the end of my story, but it never truly ended for me. Every now and then, I'll hear a breeze at night that sounds almost like a voice. I'll catch movement out of the corner of my eye, a shape that seems too tall, too wrong for an animal. I'm left with questions that might never have answers. Scars that run deeper than I'd like to admit, and nightmares that replay the last moments I saw Sarah, running with that cursed amulet clutched in her hand. The desert doesn't forget its debts, and I suspect I owe it a piece of my soul, one it might call in at any moment. And as for Sarah, I don't know if she's alive or dead, a victim of the skinwalker, the looters, or her own greed. Maybe she's out there somewhere, living a new life, haunted by the same desert devil that still haunts me. Or maybe the canyon claimed her, like it claimed so many others, leaving nothing behind but dust and echoes. My name's Alex Ramsey, and I'm 29, which felt a whole lot older after what happened last summer near Taos, New Mexico. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Sounds pretty, right? Well, don't let the name fool you. I went up there chasing a ghost story, a local legend about a haunted Spanish mission in the Bruja, which, said to be hanging around the ruins. My YouTube channel, Ruin Rat, was gasping for views, and I was desperate. I needed something big. Proof. You know, the kind of stuff that makes people hit that subscribe button. Looking back, maybe I should have listened when everyone and their grandma told me to stay the hell away. My partner in idiocy was my best friend since forever, Sam O'Connell. We'd been joined at the hip in high school, but life, as it usually does, threw us some curveballs. Different colleges, different jobs. The usual story. We weren't as tight as we used to be. This trip was probably my lame attempt to fix that. Or maybe I was just using him. Like I used everyone. Dragging them along on my crazy adventures. Before we headed into the mountains, we hit up this little coffee shop in Taos. Walls were covered in local art. Dusty ceiling fans spinning slow. Sam and I grabbed a table, and I was glued to my phone, scrolling through pictures of old Spanish ruins, when this voice cut through my daydream. "You're not planning to go there, are you?" I looked up. Standing over us was this woman, maybe a couple years younger, with her hands on her hips and a look that could curdle milk. Hiking boots, beat-up backpack. She looked like she'd just wrestled a bear and won. I glanced at Sam. He just shrugged the traitor. Maybe, I said, trying to sound all casual. Heard there's this, cool abandoned mission up there. She let out this heavy sigh, like she'd heard it all a million times before. "I'm Riley Martinez," she said, "and you really shouldn't go. That mission is part of local history. You can't just go tromping all over it. Just documenting it." I shot back, a little more defensive than I meant to. "No harm, no foul, bah." Sam, ever the peacemaker, introduced himself, trying to smooth things over. Riley looked unimpressed but asked if we were at least packed right. I told her we had flashlights, a tent that was probably older than me, and enough snacks to feed a small army. I didn't mention that my GPS was on its last legs, or that most of my high-quality camping gear came from the clearance aisle. Truth was, I wasn't too worried about safety. The risk was half the fun, right? Riley gave me this long, hard look, like she was trying to figure out if I was just stupid or actually crazy. "The place you're heading to," she said, her voice low. "People around here say it's cursed. They talk about the spirit of Abruzza, but it's more than that. It's something evil. Animals turn up dead. Hikers vanish. Don't say I didn't warn you." My heart did a little drum solo against my ribs. This was gold. "That's exactly why we gotta check it out," I said, probably a little too excited. "Thanks for the heads up, though." Sam shot me a look. He hated it when I got cocky with the locals. Riley looked like she couldn't decide whether to roll her eyes or call the park rangers. Finally, she pulled up a chair and sat down. "If you're going no matter what," she said, "I'll show you where it is. At least let me keep you from getting lost in the wrong part of the mountains." Sam raised an eyebrow. "We appreciate that," he said. I nodded, forcing a smile. Truthfully, I was stoked. A local guide who knew the area and all the spooky stories. This was going to be epic. Riley told us to meet her at dawn outside the shop, and then she took off. Sam waited until she was gone before he turned on me. "Alex," he said, "do you ever think that maybe we should just, I don't know, not piss off everyone in a 5-mile radius everywhere we go?" I shrugged. Sam, you worry too much. This is gonna be huge." He sighed. "Fine. Just don't push her too hard. She's actually trying to help." Did I listen? Of course not. My middle name should have been Bad Idea. The next morning came way too early. We loaded our gear into Riley's Jeep, which looked like it could handle a zombie apocalypse. I was planning to film a little intro for my channel, but figured I should wait until we got to the ruins. Build the suspense, you know. Riley was quiet during the drive, like she was seriously regretting her decision to babysit us. Even Sam was tense, fiddling with the zipper on his backpack like it held the nuclear launch codes. Once we turned off the main highway and onto this bumpy dirt road, it felt like we were driving off the edge of the world. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains got bigger and bigger, some snow still clinging to the peaks. The higher we went, the wilder it got. Twisted pine trees, sharp rocks, and the occasional drop off that made my stomach do a flip. This was definitely not your average Sunday drive. Eventually, Riley pulled over at this makeshift campsite near a trailhead. "We'll camp here," she said, cutting the engine. "The ruins are about an hour's hike. We'll go in the morning." Night fell fast and quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, more like a heavy, suffocating quiet. Our tent was tiny and about as good at keeping out the cold as a wet paper bag. I tried to film a quick clip, shining my flashlight on my face to be all spooky. The light flickered, then died. "That's weird," I muttered. "These batteries were brand new." "Mine's dead too," Sam said, clicking his flashlight on and off. "Must be defective." Riley's voice cut through the darkness. "We're not doing anything else tonight. Get some rest." I wasn't about to argue. It was freezing. We huddled in our sleeping bags, trying to steal each other's body heat. I woke up to this rustling sound outside, like someone was going through our stuff. I crawled out of the tent, heart hammering, and saw footprints in the dirt, leading off into the woods. Something had ripped open a bag of trail mix, leaving wrappers everywhere. Sam came out behind me. "A beer," he whispered. "No claw marks," I said, my mind already spinning. This was weird, even for me. Riley joined us, scanning the trees with her flashlight. "Could be anything," she said, but her voice was tight. "It's not a good sign. We're heading up to the ruins as soon as we can. Let's gather what's left of our gear and move." She seemed spooked, even though she tried to hide it. None of us said anything about the missing hikers or the weird stuff that supposedly happened around here, but I could see it in their eyes. They were both freaked out. Me. I was trying not to let the fear overshadow the excitement. This was the kind of stuff my viewers would eat up. It took us about an hour to reach the old mission. The trail was like something out of a fairy tale, but a dark, twisted one. The morning light barely made it through the thick pine trees. Every now and then, we'd find a pile of animal bones or pieces of broken pottery. Hints that something messed up had happened here. Riley didn't say a word, but she kept looking over her shoulder, like she was expecting something, or someone to jump out at us. Finally, the forest opened up, and there it was. Crumbling adobe walls covered in vines, broken arches, hallways that had half collapsed. It was like stepping back in time. I could almost feel the weight of the years pressing down on me. I set up my camera to film as I walked toward the entrance. The floor was a mess. Splintered wood, broken tiles. But someone had definitely been here recently. There was a circle of stones in the middle of the courtyard, with scorch marks like someone had lit a fire, and around it little animal skulls. "That's not normal," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. Riley swallowed hard. "I've read about Brujeria practiced in these mountains," she said, "but this is intense." A gust of wind whipped through the courtyard, scattering dust and ashes. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I panned the camera around. This was it. This was the kind of footage I'd been dreaming of. While I was filming, Sam wandered off into a side hallway, shining his flashlight on some old murals of saints and crucifixes. He called out for us to come check it out. Riley and I followed. The hallway led to a small room with beat-up pews. At the front was this old altar, all scratched up, and on it a half-decayed goat carcass. The smell hit us like a punch in the face. Flies were buzzing around it. It was disgusting. Sam looked like he was going to throw up. Riley covered her mouth. I felt a weird mix of excitement and something else. Something that felt a lot like dread, like we'd crossed a line we weren't supposed to cross. "Let's get out of here," Sam said, taking a step back. Before we could move, this unholy wail echoed through the corridors. It started low, like wind whistling through a crack, but it built into this shrieking moan that made every hair on my body stand on end. Riley's eyes went wide. "What was that?" she breathed. We rushed back into the courtyard, looking around for the source of the sound. The daylight seemed to be fading, and clouds were rolling in fast. It wasn't supposed to storm, but the sky was turning this ugly, bruised color. "Did you feel that?" Riley asked. Like the ground just shifted. I hadn't felt anything physically, but my gut was screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. Sam hurried over. "We need to leave," he insisted, his voice tight with panic. "There's nothing here worth dying for." I bit my lip. Part of me wanted to keep filming, to explore more, but even I wasn't stupid enough to ignore that cry, or the look on Sam and Riley's faces. "Fine," I conceded. "We'll come back tomorrow, if the weather's better." But we started heading back toward the trees, and that's when we saw them. Footprints. Bare footprints, too big to be Riley's, but narrow like a woman's. They led from the edge of the courtyard back into the mission. "I thought we were alone," Sam said, his voice thick with tension. Riley took a shaky breath. "This is how it starts," she whispered. "The Bruja lures you in." "Stop it," I snapped, even though my own fear was starting to claw its way up my throat. "There's probably just some homeless guy, or some local messing with us. We'll find the jeep and get out of here for now." But getting out of there wasn't going to be that easy. Not by a long shot. We made it halfway down the trail when Riley suddenly stopped. The path ahead was blocked. Branches, thick ones, were stacked across the trail, like someone had built a makeshift fence. "What the?" I muttered. "That wasn't there before." Sam tried to pull one of the bigger branches loose, and it snapped with this loud crack. Almost immediately, we heard rustling in the bushes behind us. We turned, just in time to catch a glimpse of something white moving between the trees. "Go, go, go," I hissed. We shoved aside enough branches to squeeze through, hearts pounding like crazy. The forest seemed darker now, like it was getting late, even though it was still early. The rustling kept pace with us, like something was following us, staying just out of sight. Every time I thought I saw something, it vanished. We finally reached the Jeep after what felt like an eternity. Riley jumped into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. She tried again, cursing under her breath. Nothing. Sam and I got out to check under the hood, and that's when we saw it. Wires had been ripped out. Not chewed, ripped. Like someone had deliberately sabotaged the Jeep. What do we do now? Sam shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Riley was rummaging through her pack. We'll hike back, she said, her voice tight. The main road isn't that far. Worst case, we camp another night. The thought of another night in these woods made my stomach churn, but we didn't have a choice. We grabbed our packs and started walking. The sun was starting to set, and that creepy gloom was settling in again. We didn't talk much. Fear had pretty much shut us all up. After about an hour, I realized something was wrong. Wait, I said, stopping abruptly. Where's Riley? Sam spun around, his eyes wide. She was right behind us. We backtracked, calling her name, my flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness. We found her pack lying on the trail, its contents spilled out. No sign of Riley. Riley, Sam yelled, his voice echoing through the silent trees. No answer. We stood there, frozen. Sam wanted to keep searching, but every instinct I had was screaming at me that this was a trap. And I told him so. Are you serious? Sam snapped, his voice trembling with anger. She came out here to help us, and we're just going to leave her. His voice cracked. Why have to find her? I swallowed, trying to stay calm. All right, I relented, but we need a plan. If something took her, we can't just wander around like idiots. Sam glared at me. You're always so selfish, he hissed. If it wasn't for your stupid YouTube channel, none of us would even be here. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right, and I hated him for it. But we didn't have time for that. We kept moving, calling Riley's name, bracing for any movement in the shadows. My flashlight started flickering again, the batteries mysteriously draining. We stumbled into this small clearing, lit by the last bit of daylight, and that's when we saw her. Riley was tied to a thin pine tree, her head slumped forward, her arms pinned to her sides. Relief washed over me, and we ran toward her. But as we got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her eyes were open, and they were glowing with this faint, unnatural light. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice. It was deeper, rougher, like gravel rolling downhill. You dare disturb my sacred ground? The voice hissed from Riley's lips. She raised her head, her mouth twisting into a sneer I'd never seen on her face before. Sam gasped. Riley. Whatever was inside Riley laughed, a low, guttural sound. Your friend can't hear you now, it said. I am here in her stead. You stole from my altar. You broke my circle. I realized with a jolt that it was talking about the bones, the symbols we'd trampled on. Maybe we had disturbed something we shouldn't have. We didn't mean to, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Riley's body jerked, like she was having a seizure, and then she spoke again. Meaning is irrelevant. You have transgressed. One must remain as an offering. Sam reached out a trembling hand, but it snarled, baring her teeth in a way that was more animal than human. I yanked him back, The thing wearing Riley's face turned its glowing eyes on me. You, it said, would sacrifice your friend to save your own skin. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. What are you talking about? It tilted its head, its lips curling into a mocking grin. I see it in your heart. You want glory more than you value his life. Will you make the bargain? A wave of sick fear and a terrifying sense of possibility washed over me. My mind raced. If I said yes, I could buy my freedom. But could I really sacrifice Sam? That was insane. He was my friend. I opened my mouth to refuse. But then, things got even worse. Before I could utter a word, Sam grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Was it understanding? We're leaving, he snarled at the witch. And we're taking Riley Da. He lunged forward, trying to untee the ropes that bound her to the tree. The thing in Riley's body let out a piercing shriek that made my ears ring. The wind picked up again, swirling around us like a mini tornado. I saw shapes in the dust, faces twisted in agony, hallucinations, or something worse. The shriek cut off as Riley slumped forward again. Sam turned to me, panting, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "We have to carry her," he said. I nodded. But as we moved closer, Riley's head jerked up. She hissed, like a cornered animal, her body twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. She laughed again, but it was a tortured, horrible sound. "You can't save her," the witch's voice echoed, distorted and amplified by the wind. "She's my vessel now." Sam looked at me, desperation etched on his face. And in that moment, everything I'd been trying to ignore came crashing down on me. My arrogance, my obsession with my stupid channel, the real danger we were in. I didn't want to admit it, but something supernatural had taken control of Riley. The witch spoke again, its gaze locking onto me with terrifying intensity. "Leave him behind," she said, nodding at Sam. "Do that, and I'll let you go free." Sam turned to me, his eyes blazing with disbelief. "You're not actually considering that," he spat. I stammered, taking a step back. The wind roared, whipping debris around us. My breath came in ragged gasps. I was drowning in dread. Maybe it was the suffocating darkness of those woods, or the sheer terror of seeing something so impossibly evil. Or maybe it was just who I really was, deep down. But in that moment, I weighed my own life against Sam's. "No," I whispered, trying to summon the courage to refuse. "I'm not." Before I could finish, the witch let out another ear-splitting howl. The air pressure seemed to change, and I felt this wave of dizziness. Sam shouted my name, but my ears were ringing so loud I could barely hear him. Then, in a blinding rush of panic and a sickening wave of self-preservation, I swung my flashlight at him. I connected with his temple with a sickening thud. He staggered. I struck again, tears burning my eyes. He collapsed to the forest floor, unconscious, or maybe worse. My whole body shook. I didn't know what I was doing, only that the witch was forcing my hand, and I was too much of a coward to resist. "Take him," I rasped, stumbling away. I heard the creature inside Riley laughing. Then I saw them closing in, shadowy figures, dragging Sam's limp form away. My vision blurred with tears, and my stomach churned with self-loathing. But I kept running. I don't know how I made it out of those woods. Adrenaline fueled me, and the howling wind at my back pushed me forward. I kept expecting one of those phantoms to grab me, but they never did. By dawn, I found the campsite, the wrecked Jeep. Riley was there, lying on the ground, still and pale. She looked like she'd been tossed aside like a rag doll. I rushed to her, checking her pulse. Weak, but there. I tried to shake her awake, calling her name, but she wouldn't stir. I had no choice but to drag her to my SUV, which I'd parked a short distance away. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every muscle in my body screamed, but the guilt pushed me on. Maybe if I saved her, I could make up for what I'd done. A little. When we finally reached my car, I laid her in the back seat. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. Then she passed out again. I drove. I drove like a maniac, the images of the night before playing over and over in my head. Sam was probably dead. Or worse. The drive back to civilization felt surreal. My clothes were torn, my arms and legs covered in scratches, and I had this wild, haunted look in my eyes. What had I become? I took Riley to the hospital in Taos. Told them we'd had an accident hiking, leaving out all the terrifying details. They took her in, and I left before anyone could ask too many questions. Weeks later, back home, I tried to edit the footage I'd filmed. But every time I watched it, the guilt overwhelmed me. I saw how I'd brushed off every warning, how I'd dragged my best friend into a nightmare, and how I'd ultimately betrayed him. Still, part of me couldn't resist uploading a teaser to my channel. Grainy clips of the mission ruins, quick glimpses of that horrifying clearing. The video blew up, thousands of views, comments pouring in. People were fascinated by the real horror we'd captured. The guilt ate at me, but I kept posting updates, fueled by the attention. Then things started happening in the footage. Weird distortions, shadows flickering where there shouldn't be any, and sometimes a figure in the background, a silhouette that looked a lot like Sam. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, but the more I watched, the clearer it became. In one frame, paused at just the right second, I could see Sam's face, turned toward the camera, eyes empty, mouth open in a silent scream. Every time I saw that image, a wave of dread washed over me. I tried to find answers. I called Riley several times. She'd been discharged from the hospital, but never answered. Eventually, I drove back to Taos, only to learn from a nurse that she'd left town. No forwarding address. Alone and tormented, I spiraled. Late at night, I'd hear whispers outside my apartment door. My dog would bark at nothing. The lights flickered constantly. I had the place checked for electrical problems, but no one could find anything wrong. One night, I woke up to a scratching sound at my window. I froze, heart hammering, sure I'd see Sam's face or something worse. But when I finally looked, there was nothing there. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares got worse. I dreamt of the mission, of the cackling Bruja in Riley's body, of Sam's dying screams, and always those footprints leading me in circles, trapped in a maze of guilt and terror. The final straw came when I got an email from an anonymous account. The subject line, Sangre de Cristo, payment due. There was no message, just an attached image. It was a blurry photo of me, standing over Sam's unconscious body in the forest, my flashlight raised like a weapon. I shut my laptop, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Whoever or whatever had sent that message clearly wanted me to remember what I'd done. My betrayal. I was trapped, cornered by my own conscience and by forces I didn't understand. I haven't been back to the mountains since. I can't bring myself to delete the footage, but I can't watch it either. My subscribers keep asking for updates about the haunted mission, but I haven't posted anything new. I barely leave my apartment. Sometimes I wonder if Sam is still alive, wandering those cursed woods, or if he's something else now, a spirit bound to the ruins. The thought haunts me every single night, but I can't go back. I know the Bruja would never let me leave a second time. I'm telling this now as a warning, and maybe as a confession. I doubt there's any real forgiveness for what I did. I can still feel the witch's presence gnawing at the edges of my mind, and I can still see Sam's face whenever I close my eyes. So, that's my story. How my arrogance and fear led me to trade my friend's life for my own survival. If you ever find yourself near the Sangre de Cristo Mountains with an itch to explore, do yourself a favor. Stay the hell away from the old Spanish mission. The Bruja is real, and she isn't finished with any of us. Maybe one day I'll find the courage to go back, to face whatever's lurking in those ruins. But until then, I live with the knowledge of what I did and the chilling certainty that Sam, or the thing he's become, might be searching for me in the darkness, and he won't rest until he finds me. My name's Mike Johnson, 45 years old, and last July, during one of those heat waves that just bake you alive, I thought I had this genius idea. I was gonna rent this old RV, take the family out to Otero Mesa, New Mexico, and teach them some real-life survival skills. You know, self-reliance, bonding, all that good stuff. My wife, Sarah, our 17-year-old daughter, Chloe, and our 11-year-old little Timmy, I figured it'd bring us closer. Man, was I wrong. So, we set out early on a Monday. The RV was ancient, sure, but I used to be a mechanic. I trusted my skills. At least I thought I did. But the engine, it was rumbling, kind of groaning, you know. Not quite right. Sarah kept giving me these worried looks. She's always been the anxious one, my Sarah, but I just brushed it off. I was too pumped to hit the road, I guess. We were gonna spend a whole week out there, exploring, hiking during the cooler parts of the day, me teaching the kids how to rough it. Chloe, naturally, acted like it was the end of the world. No cell service. The horror. She just slouched in her seat, earbuds in, probably blasting whatever music teenagers are into these days. Timmy, on the other hand, kept asking, "Are we there yet?" every 10 minutes. Bless his heart. Sarah sat beside me, arms crossed, just staring out at the horizon. Honestly, the tension was already building. Chloe was missing her friends. Sarah was freaked out about being in the middle of nowhere. But me, I tried to stay positive, focusing on the open road, the wide open space. We got there in the afternoon, sun blazing down like a furnace. But the scenery, man, it was breathtaking. Just endless desert, these huge plains stretching out forever, with mountains in the distance all hazy and purple. We found this flat spot near a dry river to set up camp. It looked perfect, at least to me. Even the kids seemed kinda stoked for a minute. Chloe wandered off to take pictures. She's into photography, wants to go to art school and all that. Timmy was messing around with these binoculars I brought, scanning the horizon like some kind of little explorer. Sarah just kept commenting on the heat, and I jokingly said we'd all be sun worshippers by the end of the week. Got a weak smile out of her for that one. After spending what felt like an eternity messing with the RV, checking the brakes, which, let me tell you, were not in great shape, and fiddling with the generator, we finally settled in for the night. With no city lights around, the sky was just covered in stars. It was beautiful, but almost too quiet, and when I turned in, I just couldn't shake this feeling, this unease, like something wasn't quite right. I hardly slept that night. The next morning, we packed up some snacks and water for a little hike. It was still early, so the heat wasn't too insane yet. Chloe was dragging behind us, snapping pictures of every other cactus and rock. Timmy, full of energy, was racing ahead, excited about every little thing, especially these jackrabbits that kept darting out from under the bushes. Sarah stuck close to me, her eyes darting around like she expected something to jump out at us any second. I get it, the desert can be a little spooky. At one point, Chloe peeled off to take some pictures by herself. I figured she's almost an adult. I don't need to hover, right? So, I let her wander a little ways off. Big mistake. Huge. A few minutes later, we hear this blood-curdling scream. We all took off running towards her, thinking rattlesnake, scorpion. Maybe she fell and broke something. But what we found, it was way worse. It was this old beat-up boot just sitting there in the sand. And inside was a severed human foot. I swear I almost threw up. The flesh was all gone mostly, just some nasty bits of... I don't even want to describe it. And the flies, oh God, the flies were everywhere, buzzing around like crazy. Jesus Christ, I muttered, my stomach churning. Timmy stumbled backward, his eyes huge. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. And Chloe, she just stood there, shaking like a leaf, her face completely white. We need to leave, Sarah said, her voice tight with panic. Right now. Now. Part of me knew she was right. This was seriously messed up. But another part of me, maybe it was pride. Maybe I was just being stubborn, I don't know. I tried to play it cool. I told them it was probably just some hiker who got lost, maybe got bit by something, and the animals. Well, nature took its course. The desert's unforgiving, right? Sarah's eyes were filled with this look, a mix of fear and, I told you so. But I somehow convinced her that we should at least head back to the RV, catch our breath, and then decide what to do. The rest of the day was a blur of tension. Nobody talked much. I checked the RV again, making extra sure we could actually get out of there if we needed to. Night fell slowly, and that furnace, like heat, finally let up a bit. We all turned in early, this heavy silence filling our little home on wheels. I don't think any of us really slept. Around midnight, I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind. But then, I realized it was footsteps. Soft, shuffling steps circling the RV. My heart was pounding like a drum in my chest. I peeked out the window, straining my eyes in the dark. And I saw it just for a second, shadow, moving fast across the sand, disappearing behind some rocks. Now, I was scared, no doubt about it. But I also felt this surge of, I don't know, protectiveness maybe. I grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar, best weapon I could find, and told Sarah I was going to check it out. She insisted on coming with me, which honestly made me feel a little better. Chloe stayed inside with Timmy. We stepped out into the cool night air, and everything felt amplified. My breathing, my heartbeat, the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I walked around the RV, shining the flashlight, searching. But there was nothing. No footprints. No sign of whoever, or whatever I'd seen. We went back inside, feeling uneasy but also a little relieved. Maybe I was just seeing things. Maybe it was an animal. But the next morning that feeling vanished. We found our cooler had been opened, and half our supplies were gone. Water bottles, some of those freeze, dried meals, even the can opener. Frustrated, I checked the ground for tracks, but the earth was so hard packed. I could barely make out anything. Animal or human, I had no idea. Sarah shot me this look that just screamed, "I told you we should have left." And this time, I couldn't even argue. Chloe stayed quiet, fiddling with her camera, looking pale and scared. Even Timmy, who was usually so upbeat, asked if we could just go home. I told him we'd figure it out after checking the rest of the area, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Inside, I was starting to freak out. This was getting way too weird. We were in trouble. Later that day, while the sun was still high and beating down like crazy, we had visitors. 2 guys walking towards us across the desert. They looked rough, really rough. Dirty, clothes all ripped up, hair matted with sweat and dust. And each of them was carrying a rifle. My first thought was, okay, maybe they're rangers or hunters, but something felt off. They waved, calling out a greeting. "Hey there," one of them said, his voice raspy. "You folks lost." Sarah stepped behind me, and I moved forward, trying to act casual but also cautious. "We're just camping," I replied, trying to sound confident. The guy flashed this grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hunting's been sparse around here," he said, scratching at his scraggly beard. "It's dangerous too. You might want to be careful, Da." His friend, or brother maybe, let out this low chuckle, a humorless sound that sent chills down my spine. "We can help if you got any troubles with that RV," he added. "We're pretty handy." My gut was churning. Something about these guys was seriously wrong. Their eyes were too bright, almost feverish, and they kept glancing at our stuff. The water jug next to the RV door, the beat-up cooler. I forced a polite smile. "Appreciate the offer, but we're good," I said. "I'm a mechanic." They lingered though, clearly sizing us up. One of them pointed at Chloe, who was standing a little ways off, trying to look busy with her camera. "Nice camera," he commented, his voice oily. Chloe didn't reply, just took a step closer to Sarah. Finally, after this awkward silence that felt like it lasted forever, they sauntered off. Their laughter carried on the desert wind long after they'd disappeared over a rise. "That's it," Sarah hissed the moment they were gone. "We're leaving. Now. But here's the thing. When I tried to start the RV, it wouldn't turn over. The engine sputtered, the generator coughed, but nothing. It was dead. A wave of anger and dread washed over me. I popped the hood, trying to figure out what was wrong, checking connections, hoses, cursing the old engine for being such a piece of junk. By then, The sun was so hot I could barely breathe. I had to retreat into the shade for water, feeling completely defeated. Night fell again before I could figure out the problem. I was starting to think this whole trip was cursed. That night was the worst, and it was about to get a whole lot more terrible, because that's when Chloe disappeared. She'd been restless ever since those creeps showed up, pacing around the RV, complaining about the heat, the tension, everything. Sarah and I were busy trying to calm down Timmy, who was convinced there was something evil out there watching us. We were all on edge, and, in all the chaos, none of us noticed Chloe slip out. It wasn't until Sarah called for her to help with dinner and got no answer that we realized she was gone. Panic seized me. I grabbed a flashlight and we started searching, our hearts pounding so loud it was deafening. We combed the area around the RV, calling her name, but the empty land just swallowed our voices. It was like she vanished into thin air. Then Timmy spoke up, his voice trembling. "Dad," he said, "I heard Chloe talking to someone outside earlier. I thought it was you, but it didn't sound right." I was scared. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. We immediately expanded our search. The moon was bright enough that I spotted footprints in a patch of looser sand. Small ones, about Chloe's size, and next to them, larger, heavier prints. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. We followed those tracks for what felt like miles, my mind racing, imagining the worst. Finally, we saw a light flickering in the distance. It looked like an old shack, or maybe the remains of a cabin that was never finished. The door was propped open, and my heart was in my throat. I had a terrible feeling about what we'd find inside. I approached the shack slowly, crowbar in hand, every sense on high alert. Sarah was clutching my arm so tight her nails were digging into my skin. Timmy, terrified but refusing to stay behind, trailed close. Inside, the shack was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. And there, tied to a chair, was Chloe. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her face. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of fury. "Chloe," I whispered, rushing forward to untie her. "Who did this?" Sarah kept watch near the doorway, her eyes darting nervously into the darkness outside. Chloe was shaking so badly she could barely speak. They said they had another camera." She stammered, her voice choked with sobs. "A better one. They said they could show me a good spot for pictures, somewhere with a great view. I was curious." Before I could question her further, we heard footsteps outside. Heavy, methodical steps crunching on gravel. The light from the lantern danced wildly as the sound grew closer. We were trapped. I gripped the crowbar, adrenaline surging through my veins. There was nowhere to hide. Two figures filled the doorway, and I recognized them instantly. The same men from earlier, the ones with the rifles. Well, one of them sneered, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "Look who came knocking." Chloe let out a muffled scream. The men lunged, and I swung the crowbar, catching one of them across the jaw. He dropped to the ground with a grunt, but the other guy swung his rifle, cracking the butt against my arm. Pain shot up my shoulder, almost making me drop the crowbar. Maria tried to drag Chloe out of the chair and away from the doorway, but a third figure appeared, blocking their escape. This time it was a woman, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with a long, wicked-looking knife in her hand. Everything became chaos, a tangle of limbs, the glow of the lantern dancing over twisted shadows. Chloe screaming, Sarah yelling, Timmy whimpering behind us. It was a blur of motion and terror. I managed to slam the crowbar into the woman's knife hand, sending the blade clattering across the floor. At the same time, Sarah and Chloe, pulling Timmy, ducked past the men and out the door. I took one last wild swing at the remaining man, then bolted out the door after them. We ran. We ran like hell through the desert night, the flickering lantern light receding behind us. The men, those cult members, were shouting, furious, their voices echoing across the plains. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. Chloe stumbled once, but Sarah caught her, and we kept going. We had to get back to the RV. Maybe, just maybe, we could barricade ourselves inside. When we finally reached the camp, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The generator was dead, and then I saw the footprints. Everywhere, all around the RV. It looked like a whole group of people had been here, trampling the ground. My chest tightened with fear. There was no question now. These people had been targeting us, probably watching us from the start. We scrambled inside the RV, locking the door behind us. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably, apologizing over and over. Timmy was crying too, clinging to Sarah. I frantically rummaged through drawers, looking for anything that could be used as a weapon. All I could find was a small hunting knife. I cursed myself for not being better prepared. The fear inside that RV was thick, suffocating. We were trapped like animals waiting for the slaughter. Then, a heavy thud against the outer wall made us all jump. Then another. A voice, raspy and mocking, called out from outside. You can't hide in there forever. They were throwing rocks, or maybe even using tools, trying to break in. I looked at Sarah, at my kids' terrified faces, and I knew we couldn't just wait for them to get in. We had to do something. My eyes fell on the gas can, the one I'd used to fill the generator. An idea sparked in my mind, crazy but desperate. We're gonna set a trap, I said, my voice low and urgent. Sarah's eyes widened. Are you crazy? She whispered. We'll blow ourselves up. Only if we're still here, I replied. We'll lure them inside, or at least close, then ignite the gas. We have to do something. Before we could finalize a plan, the door handle rattled violently. Chloe let out a stifled scream, and Timmy yelped. We all threw our weight against the door, trying to hold it shut. But the force on the other side was too strong. I knew the flimsy lock wouldn't hold for long. Desperate, I yelled through the door. We have food, water. Take whatever you want. Just leave us alone. Lauter bone, chilling in its emptiness, answered me. I recognized one of the voices as the man I'd hit with the crowbar. Might do that, he said, after we've had our fill. Another laugh, sharper this time, maybe from the woman with the knife. Adrenaline spiked, fueling a sense of absolute terror. We were running out of time. I motioned for Sarah to take the kids to the back of the RV while I poured gasoline near the entry, my hands shaking. I grabbed matches from a drawer, my heart pounding against my ribs. More thuds and curses from outside. I could picture them circling the RV, looking for another way in. Then, something slammed against the rear window, and a spiderweb of cracks spread across the glass. Suddenly, Timmy screamed. In a blur, I saw an arm reaching through the partially shattered window, trying to grab him. I rushed over, but I slipped on the spilled gasoline, crashing hard onto my back. The crowbar skittered away. They had Timmy. They were pulling him through the broken window. His terrified screams echoed in the night, then abruptly stopped. Sarah collapsed, sobbing, her fingers bleeding from the glass shards. Chloe stared at me, her eyes wide with horror. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. My boy was gone. The only thing I could do was react, to survive, to try to get him back if it was even possible. I grabbed the matches, tears of rage and despair burning my eyes. In a shaky voice, I told Sarah and Chloe to run as soon as I opened the door. I didn't know if they could get away, but they had to try. I pushed the RV door open. Stepping outside with the matches ready, my gaze met the scene before me. Nobody was there at the door. Maybe they had taken Timmy and moved away. Or maybe they were lying in wait. In a low voice, I whispered, "Go now," to Sarah and Chloe. We dashed away from the RV, hearts pounding, not daring to look back. We made it to a small rock formation about 40 yards away. There, I turned, match in hand. The cannibals had swarmed the RV, rummaging for supplies. I could see their silhouettes, half a dozen or more, flickering in the moonlight. Some were tearing apart the front cab. Others were trying to pry open compartments. One figure was near the back, by the broken window where they'd pulled Timmy out. My throat tightened. I struck the match and flung it towards the RV. The gasoline caught instantly. Flames burst along the side, creeping up the walls with terrifying speed. Shouts erupted from inside the RV, a chorus of rage and pain. For a moment, I felt a grim satisfaction. Then the gas tanks exploded. The shockwave knocked me backward, throwing me to the ground. A searing heat slammed into my face, and my ears rang. Flames shot into the sky, igniting the night with an unholy glare. Sarah and Chloe cowered behind the rocks, shielding their faces. I slumped down, the ground spinning beneath me, the acrid smell of burning plastic and rubber filling my lungs. I prayed that the explosion had taken out most of the cult members. We stayed crouched there, our hearts racing for what felt like an eternity. The flames roared, and I heard no more voices from the RV. But Timmy was still gone. My mind was a whirlwind of guilt, fear, and desperation. Sarah's tear-streaked face mirrored my own agony, and Chloe looked numb with shock. Slowly, we crept away from the burning wreckage, stumbling into the desert night. We had no supplies, no water, and no idea where we were going. We were utterly lost. We wandered for hours, under the relentless sun. Our throats were parched, our eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, and every step felt like a monumental effort. Sarah was limping, probably from the glass shards that had cut her feet, and Chloe kept glancing over her shoulder, as though expecting to see those monsters chasing after us. Eventually, as if in a dream, a border patrol truck appeared on the horizon. I almost collapsed with relief. The officer inside looked stunned when he saw us. He gave us water, radioed for backup, and asked us a million questions. We told him everything about the kidnapping, the cult, the explosion. I could barely string a sentence together. but Sarah kept sobbing Timmy's name over and over. When more officers arrived, they took us to a small medical station. I was treated for burns on my arms. Sarah had her feet bandaged, and Chloe was in such shock she couldn't even speak. We gave the authorities every detail we could remember. The severed foot, the strange men, the shack, the explosion. I kept insisting that they had to go back, that they had to find Timmy. They searched the area for days, but they found nothing. No sign of Timmy, no body, no footprints. Nothing to prove he was alive or dead. The official story was that a small group of criminals, maybe a cult, maybe human traffickers, they didn't know, had ambushed us. They never confirmed anything about the severed foot or the missing supplies, but they speculated that the same group had been preying on travelers in the region. We stayed in a motel for a week, giving statements, hoping for any news about Timmy, but none came. They eventually released us, saying they would keep searching, but that the desert doesn't give up its secrets easily. I clung to this desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, Timmy had escaped somehow, that he was out there, wandering, waiting to be found. But deep down, I knew how unlikely that was. Sarah barely slept. She'd jolt awake some nights, swearing she heard Timmy calling her name in the distance. Chloe blamed herself, convinced that if she hadn't snuck out that night, none of this would have happened. And me, I blamed myself for everything, for dismissing the warning signs, for being so stubborn, for pushing us to stay out there. We tried to go back to our normal lives, but normal didn't exist anymore. I quit my job, spending every spare moment researching Otoro Mesa, scanning satellite images, organizing my own searches. A part of me will never give up, even though everyone else seems to have. Sometimes I stand at the edge of that desert, letting the wind whip sand against my face, and I imagine I can hear faint echoes in the distance. I call out my son's name, hoping, praying that he'll answer. He never does. That's my story. That's what happened in the blistering heat of last July. I set out to teach my family about survival, about self-reliance. But instead, we encountered horrors that devoured everything we knew. The police have no leads. The media forgot about us. And every night, I fight to sleep, replaying every choice I made, every second I hesitated. My name is Mike Johnson, and this nightmare will haunt me until the day I die. My name's Mike Davis, I'm 35, and let me tell you, this whole mess started late last fall. I'd just lost my job, gone through a breakup that felt like getting punched in the gut, and figured some time off, grid would do me good. I had this old RV, a real beater, but she was mine. Named her the Wanderer, a bit ironic considering. Anyway, I decided to take her out to Diablo Canyon near Durango, Colorado. Just me, my German Shepherd, Duke, and the great outdoors. Sounded perfect. I wanted to be alone, you know. Just me, Duke, and nature. Time to think, heal. Maybe do some soul searching. That was the plan, at least. What actually happened? Let's just say it nearly killed me. I rolled into Diablo Canyon on this gorgeous afternoon. Sun shining, tall pines swaying in the breeze, the whole 9 yards. It was beautiful. Honestly, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. My only worry was the canyon road. It was rough, and the Wanderer's engine wasn't exactly singing a happy tune. But I found this sweet little spot by a creek, tucked away from everything, and figured we'd be fine. Checked my phone, no signal. Perfect. I was officially off the grid. I got out, unhitched my little supply trailer, extra food, gear, you name it. My plan was simple: set up camp, do some hiking, maybe throw a line in the creek. Duke, he was in dog heaven, running around, sniffing everything. He's a big guy, about 5, and loyal as they come, always by my side. The first hour was smooth sailing. Got the awning out, checked the generator, made sure nothing was about to fall apart on the RV. She was old, but I kept her running. Once I was done, Duke and I took a little walk along the creek. We hadn't gone far when this old timer came up to us. He looked like he'd lived in the woods his whole life, worn out boots, walking stick, the whole deal. He gave me this look, then glanced at Duke, almost like he felt sorry for him. "You hear a lot?" he asked, his voice kinda gravelly. "Yeah," I said, "just me and my dog. Figured we'd get some peace and quiet." The guy tightened his grip on his stick. "You be careful," he said. "Strange things happen in these woods, especially after dark. Don't stray too far, and if you see carvings, you turn around and walk the other way." He said it like he was giving me the secret to staying alive. He didn't care what my reaction was. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but he just kept walking, leaving me with this uneasy feeling. I tried to shake it off, figured it was just local superstition. By the time Duke and I got back, the sun was setting, painting the canyon all kinds of orange and purple. It was stunning. But that night, I swear I heard whispers outside the RV. Could have been the wind, but Duke was standing at the window, this low growl in his throat. My heart was pounding. I looked out but couldn't see a thing. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, or maybe an animal. Eventually Duke settled down and I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, I decided to hike deeper into the canyon. I was hoping to find a good lookout spot, maybe take some pictures. But along the trail, I started seeing these weird symbols carved into the trees. Spirals, circles with lines through them. I couldn't make heads or tails of them. Duke kept sniffing around the trees, whining a little, like he was nervous. A part of me remembered what the old hiker said, but I kept going. I didn't see anyone else, no footprints, nothing. Still, I felt uneasy. I took a few pictures, more out of curiosity than anything else, and kept moving. It was around noon, on my way back, when I heard someone calling out. A guy came walking towards me, carrying a small backpack and smiling. He looked to be in his early 40s, clean cut, with these sharp eyes that seemed to be sizing me up. "Mind if I walk with you?" he asked. "Name's Alex Ramsey. My car died about a mile back. Any chance you could give me a lift back to town?" I hesitated. Something about him felt off. Too convenient, maybe. But what was I gonna do? Leave him stranded? "Sure," I said. "I'm Mike. I've got an RV parked not far from here." Alex walked beside me, talking about how his car overheated. He asked about my trip, why I came alone, about Duke. He was polite enough, but I noticed he never really said much about himself. When I asked what brought him to Diablo Canyon, he just shrugged and said he wanted to do some exploring. Once we got to my campsite, I offered him some water. I went inside to grab a bottle, and when I came out, he was looking at the RV's engine. "Looks like your radiator's in rough shape," he said. "Might want to keep an eye on it." I squinted at him. "Yeah, she's old, but she runs." Alex downed the water and walked around the campsite, checking everything out. I told him I'd drive him out first thing in the morning. The sun was already getting low, and the roads weren't great at night. He agreed, and I let him crash in the RV's living area. It was a small space, but it was better than nothing. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my nightmare in Diablo Canyon. That night was colder than usual. I woke up around midnight, freezing my tail off, and heard Duke whining by the door. I could have sworn I heard footsteps outside, too. Real careful, like I crept to the window. It was dark, but in the moonlight I didn't see anyone. Still, the hair on my arms was standing on end. Then came the whispers again, like the wind was carrying voices. Creepy stuff. I glanced over at Alex, who was supposedly asleep on the couch. I couldn't shake this feeling that we were being watched. It was like something was out there, just beyond the light. The next morning I found something that made my blood run cold. The RV's engine cover was ajar, and it looked like someone had messed with it. I tried to start her up, but she just sputtered and died. Great. Just great. Alex came out of the RV, yawning like he hadn't a care in the world. "Got engine trouble?" he asked, all innocent-like. "Yeah," I muttered. And it was fine until last night. I gave him a suspicious look, but he just shrugged, acting like he had no idea what I was talking about. I spent hours trying to fix the radiator and whatever else had been tampered with. Alex just paced around, offering useless advice. Eventually, he said he was going for a walk, see if he could find help. I let him go, not really believing him, but figuring I didn't have much choice. While he was gone, Duke and I went to scout around, looking for any sign of that old hiker or any other campers. About a mile from camp, we stumbled into this clearing. And let me tell you, it was messed up. There were these crude altars everywhere, made of rocks stacked up in weird shapes, with animal bones scattered around. My stomach did a flip-flop. And then I saw them, the same symbols from the trees, carved into the rocks. They were all around this big, flat stone in the center. I felt this overwhelming urge to get out of there, like the forest itself was telling me to get lost. Duke started barking like crazy, and I saw something moving in the trees. Dark shapes, flitting in and out of view. The whispering got louder, but I still couldn't tell where it was coming from. I grabbed Duke's collar, and we booked it back to camp, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew, right then and there, I had to get out of that canyon. If the RV wouldn't run, I'd hike out. But first, I had to deal with Alex. Something told me he was mixed up in all this. When I got back, Alex was at the camp, calmly sipping water like nothing had happened. "No luck finding help," he said with this little smile that made me want to punch him. "Might have to walk all the way down the main road." I studied his face, trying to figure him out. "We'll pack up and go," I said. "I'll hike back, get a tow truck or something." I was done playing nice. He shrugged. "Sure. Just let me rest a bit." A new wave of unease washed over me. I decided to gather my gear inside the RV, leaving Alex outside. I figured I'd be safer in there. at least for a little while. But a few minutes later, I started feeling dizzy. My vision got blurry, and it hit me, the water. The water I'd been drinking tasted metallic. Could he have put something in it? My body felt heavy like lead. I stumbled, trying to call for Duke, and then everything went black. I woke up with my hands tied behind my back, my legs bound, and a throbbing pain in my head. I was in that same clearing, the one with the altars, only now it was lit up by torches. Alex was standing over me, and there were 3 other figures with him, all dressed in dark clothes. One of them was the old hiker, the one who'd warned me. Except now, he was wearing a mask, a wooden thing carved like a snarling beast. Duke was nowhere in sight. Alex crouched down beside me. "Sorry about this, Mike," he said, "but you've seen too much." He gestured to the altars. "We serve the Shadow Keeper, and we need sacrifices to maintain the balance." The old hiker, who was clearly part of this messed-up cult, spoke in this gravelly voice. "We tried to warn you off, but you stayed. Curiosity is a dangerous thing here." My heart was pounding like a drum. "Where's Duke?" I choked out. Alex waved a hand dismissively. "Your dog's out there somewhere. If he's smart, he'll run." Then he turned his attention to the makeshift altar behind me. I could hear animal bones clattering, and those shapes moving in the trees. A chill ran down my spine. It felt like the whole forest was alive, closing in on me. This was bad. Really, really bad. I was tied to a post they'd driven into the ground near the biggest rock, and one of the cult members was kneeling by the altar, chanting something I couldn't understand. The whole scene was surreal. Torches flickering, shadows dancing, that eerie whispering on the wind. I struggled against the ropes, but they just cut deeper into my wrists. Alex raised a ceremonial knife, chanting along with the others. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get free, but my head was still foggy from whatever he'd drugged me with. I was trapped, and things were looking grim. This was it, I thought. This was how it ended. Then, out of nowhere, a blur of fur and teeth exploded into the clearing. Duke, he was alive, a snarling, growling ball of fury. He launched himself at one of the masked figures, clamping his jaws onto the guy's arm. The man screamed, and Alex turned surprised. That was my chance. Seeing Duke fighting like that, it was like a jolt of electricity through me. I twisted my wrists, straining against the ropes. They loosened just enough for me to free one hand. I saw the masked man slam Duke with a torch, and my dog yelped. Rage, pure and hot, surged through me. I worked faster, ignoring the burning pain in my wrists, and yanked my other hand free. I lunged for the downed cultist, who dropped a knife. My fingers closed around the hilt. Alex realized what was happening and rushed me, but I slashed wildly, catching him in the arm. He shouted in pain. Another cult member tried to tackle me, and Duke sprang at them, snarling and snapping. It was Kiaz. In the confusion, I managed to cut the ropes binding my ankles. I fought my way clear of the ritual circle, grabbing Duke by the collar. The 2 of us sprinted into the darkness, my mind reeling. Fear, adrenaline, fury, it was all swirling inside me. I had to get back to my RV. Even if it wasn't drivable, maybe I could barricade myself inside, or at least grab a weapon. We navigated the dark forest, my head throbbing, branches whipping at my face. Behind us, I could hear the cult shouting, getting organized. Their flashlights pierced the night, and I knew they wouldn't give up easily. Finally, I saw the faint glow of my campsite lantern. I stumbled forward, exhausted, and collapsed against the RV's side. Duke was limping slightly. I had no idea how badly he was hurt, but he was alive. My hands were shaking as I searched for my hunting knife, which I kept in a storage compartment. I found it, and also grabbed a small first aid kit. As I tried to tend to Duke's wound, I heard branches snapping nearby. Someone was coming. I pressed Duke to stay silent and clicked off my lantern. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Mike," Alex called out. "We can talk about this." I gripped the knife. "Jet away from here." Alex stepped into view, his left arm bleeding through torn fabric. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "We do this to protect the canyon from the Shadow Keeper. If we don't provide sacrifices, the spirit grows restless. You saw the signs, the carvings. There's a reason travelers go missing out here. If you won't comply, you'll die for nothing." My stomach churned. "You're insane. You drugged me, tried to kill my..." He raised his flashlight, illuminating the ground between us. "It's bigger than me or you. Hand yourself over, and the rest can be simple. Don't make this harder." A fear warred with fury in my chest. I glanced at Duke. If I let them take me, what would happen to him? To anyone else who stumbled in here? No, I couldn't give in. In a burst of desperation, I flung open the RV's side compartment, hoping to find anything: tools, a flare, something to defend myself. I had a small hatchet, dull but still heavy, lying next to a box of old spark flares. Grabbing the hatchet, I faced Alex. His eyes narrowed. He lunged, and I swung the hatchet. He dodged, but not completely. The blunt edge struck his side, and he gasped. He shoved me backward, and I stumbled, dropping the hatchet. He kicked it away, then grabbed me by the collar. I thrust my hunting knife forward, catching him in the chest. The impact reverberated up my arm. For a moment, neither of us moved. Alex's grip slackened, and he staggered back, blood spreading across his shirt. He tried to speak, but only a wet gurgle came out. Finally, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed onto the pine needles. My breath came in ragged gasps. I felt sick, but there was no time to process what I'd done. A frigid wind whipped through the trees, carrying that strange whisper again. The shadows around us seemed to move, and I realized the Shadow Keeper might not just be some story they made up. Even if it was just a superstition, the fear felt real. Torchlight flickered in the distance. The other cult members were still out there, searching. I stumbled into my RV, pushing Duke in ahead of me. In the dark, I tried the ignition, hoping for some miracle. It sputtered once, then died. "Damn it," I growled. Duke barked, drawing my attention to the side window. Through the glass, I saw a shape in the tree line. A silhouette, darker than the night, with two red sparks glowing where its eyes should be. Fear strangled me. I couldn't explain what I was seeing, but my entire body knew it was something unnatural. The shape drifted closer. I could hear a low hiss, like the wind itself had turned evil. I remembered the carvings, the altars, the chanting. My mind screamed that this thing was real, something the cult had tried to appease. And now, free of their twisted rituals, It was coming for me. I was trapped between a rock and a hard place. A cult that wanted to kill me, and whatever that thing was in the woods. It wasn't looking good. I grabbed a couple of those old spark flares from under the dashboard. My plan was half-baked, but maybe bright light or fire would scare it off. Whatever was. Cracking one flare, I opened the RV door just a crack and hurled it toward the figure. The flare lit up the ground in a harsh orange glare. I caught a glimpse of something tall and vaguely human-shaped, but with these long, spindly limbs and a face that seemed to shift and swirl like smoke. It recoiled from the sudden brightness, letting out a shriek that made my blood turn to ice. I could hear yelling from the other cult members. They must have seen the flare. Panic seized me. I had no time to stay. My only chance was to run at first light or keep trying to fix the Arva under cover of darkness. But with that thing, the Shadow Keeper, lurking in the trees, neither option seemed great. I tried to remember those weird symbols I'd seen. Maybe they were meant to keep this entity at bay. Rummaging through my gear, I found some chalk and paper. Desperate, I started scribbling down the shapes I'd memorized: circles, spirals, lines. It was a long shot, and I wasn't even sure I was doing them right, but it was better than nothing. Hours crawled by. I locked myself in the RV, flares at the ready, watching as dark shapes occasionally flickered past my windows. The cult members never attacked, probably regrouping or rethinking their plans. The Shadow Keeper itself seemed to hover just outside the ring of my lantern's glow, waiting. Duke stayed by my side, whimpering whenever the whispers rose to a crescendo. Finally, the faintest hint of dawn touched the sky. Gray light seeped through the pines, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could slip away, even on foot. I grabbed my hatchet, the few supplies I could carry, and some water for Duke. With the door cracked open, I scanned the area. No sign of the cult. No sign of the Shadow Keeper. Just the pale morning light stretching across the forest floor. I crept outside. My gaze fell on Alex's body, lying a short distance away, blood still staining the ground. A wave of guilt and nausea hit me, but I pushed it down. Survival was all that mattered now. I moved quickly to the RV's engine, desperate to see if I could rig it back into operation. In the growing light, I spotted what Alex had done. Lines had been cut, hoses ripped out. It would take more mechanical knowledge than I had to fix it. That left me only one choice: to leave the RV behind. Before heading off, I heard distant voices. The cult was still searching. But in the silence of dawn, I realized I could slip into the woods opposite them. Duke and I started our trek through the canyon, hoping to eventually cross a road where we could get help. I walked for hours, my senses on high alert. The forest felt oppressive, like the trees themselves were watching us. Every snapping twig made me jump. Duke kept his nose low, sniffing the ground, occasionally letting out a low growl. Just when I thought we might make it out, the wind shifted, carrying those whispering voices again. My heart pounded. A cold presence seemed to drift behind me, and the sun dimmed as clouds passed overhead. Glancing back, I saw a flicker of black in the pines. Long limbs, a gaunt silhouette. The Shadow Keeper. It didn't vanish in daylight, but it seemed weaker, the swirling darkness around it less dense. Mustering my courage, I held a spark flare and my hatchet, ready to use them. I stared it down, stepping backward slowly, methodically. Duke and I retreated. The Shadow Keeper advanced, then shrank from the flare's bright tip, hissed, and sank back into the canopy. I don't remember how long we walked, only that my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Eventually, the trees thinned, and we stumbled onto a gravel road that cut through the canyon. Farther down, I saw a vehicle, a pickup truck with a sheriff's logo. Relief flooded me. A search party had been dispatched for a missing camper, someone else who had vanished earlier in the week. They saw me and Duke, battered and half delirious, coming out of the woods. At first, I rambled about the cult, the Shadow Keeper, the altars. They gave me skeptical looks, but they did see my injuries, my cut wrists, and Duke's wounds. One deputy took my statement, and the sheriff himself led a team back toward my campsite. Later, I heard they found scattered evidence, blood, burned flares, and strange symbols, but no living soul besides me and Duke. Alex's body was gone. The altars and the clearing were discovered, though they looked old, as if no one had used them in years. The entire investigation quickly became tangled in local legends, missing persons, and unexplainable sightings. Ultimately, it faded into rumor and speculation. I was treated for dehydration and minor injuries. Duke healed from his wounds. We left Diablo Canyon with the clothes on our backs, a handful of horrifying memories, and an RV we'd never see again. The authorities listened politely, but I'm not sure they ever believed the full story. Maybe that's for the best. I've since tried to rebuild my life. I found a new job, moved to a different state, and did my best to forget the chanting, the carvings, and that cold, malevolent presence lurking among the pines. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and Duke starts growling at unseen things, I recall Alex's last words about the Shadow Keeper, about how it needed sacrifices. And I wonder if it's still there, drifting through Diablo Canyon, whispering in the trees, waiting for another unsuspecting soul to wander too far from safety. I don't ever plan on going back. Yet, part of me fears that one day the Shadow Keeper, or the cult that worships it, might come looking for me. And next time, I might not be so lucky. The memory of Diablo Canyon, the whispers in the wind, and the chilling presence of the unknown will forever haunt me. A stark reminder of the darkness that lies just beyond the edges of our world. My name is Mark Reynolds, and I'm 37 years old. This whole nightmare started last summer in the godforsaken wilderness of El Malpais National Monument in New Mexico. I'd been living out of my beat, up RV for almost a year, trying to find some peace and quiet after ditching my old life. I spent most of my adult life as a paramedic in Chicago, but after a tragedy I won't get into, I needed to get away from everything. The volcanic landscapes of El Malpais felt like another planet, and I figured the area's raw beauty might offer the kind of peace I hadn't found anywhere else. I was on my way to the monument when I pulled into this dusty gas station on the outskirts of Grants, New Mexico. That's where I met Sarah Jenkins. She looked like she was in her late 20s, her face smudged with dirt, and she was pacing around this ancient sedan with the hood up. After talking to the old guy who owned the station, who swore there wasn't a decent mechanic for miles, Sarah walked over to me, looking desperate. "Hey, you headed out toward El Malpais?" she asked. "I'm a geologist, well, amateur geologist anyway. I'm supposed to be studying the volcanic formations out there. My car just died on me. I know this is a long shot, but can I hitch a ride with you?" I hesitated. I'd gotten used to being alone. I liked the quiet. But there was something about her earnestness that got to me. Plus, it felt like the right thing to do. Besides, I figured a little company might help shake the ghosts in my head, at least for a little while. I agreed, but I warned her that my RV wasn't exactly the Ritz-Carlton. We were almost ready to leave when this young guy wandered up, shoulders hunched, sweat soaking the back of his t-shirt. He introduced himself as Alex Myers, but told us to call him Alex. He was probably in his early 20s, nervous looking, with these darting eyes. He said he'd been hitchhiking for 2 days, trying to get to Albuquerque. Car broke down, he mumbled, glancing over his shoulder like someone was after him. "Could I maybe catch a ride with you folks? Just until we get closer to civilization." I exchanged a look with Sarah. She shrugged and said, "Why not? Safety in numbers, right?" So, there I was, driving into the stark lava fields of El Malpais, with 2 complete strangers. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a weird turn of events, but I let it go. Sometimes fate has a strange way of guiding us to the people we need, or the horrors we never saw coming. The first day of driving was uneventful. Alex dozed in the back of the RV while Sarah and I made small talk about her studies. She was convinced that the region's volcanic past held more secrets than the state geologist's office cared to admit. I only half listened, more focused on the fading light as we got closer to a remote part of the monument. Night fell fast. The sky was huge and clear, dotted with stars that looked close enough to touch. We parked on a flat, rocky plateau and set up a basic camp. Sarah cooked up some canned beans and rice on a small propane stove. Alex was visibly relieved to have a hot meal. He admitted his boots were falling apart and that he'd lost most of his stuff when someone jacked his backpack at a rest stop. I gave him an extra pair of socks and a few energy bars. The poor kid was clearly out of his depth. Early the next morning, I woke up to this nasty smell, like something rotting. I unzipped the RV door and stepped out to check it out. About 50 yards from where we'd parked, I found a mangled jackrabbit. It was half eaten, with these weird cuts on its legs and body that didn't look like the work of a normal predator. Sarah joined me, covering her nose with her sleeve. "These incisions look precise," she said, her face grim, like a knife or something sharp was used. I tried to brush it off. Could be a scavenger. Could be anything out here. But a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. We packed up and drove deeper into El Malpais, where the volcanic rock formations jutted out like the blackened ruins of some lost civilization. The plan was to find a safe area near some lava tubes so Sarah could do her exploring. Alex, not wanting to get left behind, tagged along. He kept tripping over the uneven ground, cursing about his boots and the jagged rocks. I lent him a walking stick to help him keep his balance. Around noon, we found a lava tube entrance. The darkness inside felt thick, and when we went a few feet in, our flashlights caught these strange symbols scratched into the basalt walls. Circles, triangles, and shapes that looked like twisted faces. Sarah took pictures, muttering about occult markings, and giving me a worried look. Alex, already on edge, kept jerking his head at every little echo. Back at camp, I tried using my water filter to process some stream water we'd found earlier. That's when my gear started acting up. The filter's pump cracked, spewing murky water everywhere. I cursed under my breath. We didn't have enough bottled water to last more than a day or two, and the nearest store was hours back the way we came. We'll have to ration what we've got, I told the others. And tomorrow, we'll head out early to look for a spring, or at least someplace to refill. That night, we sat around a small fire, even though it was mild enough that we didn't really need one. Alex seemed jumpy, constantly scanning the darkness. Sarah tried to lighten the mood by talking about the geological history of El Malpais, but even she sounded uneasy. Sometime after midnight, I heard what sounded like whispering outside the RV. I eased open the door, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing except the vast, empty landscape. I thought I glimpsed a faint glow far to the east, but it vanished when I looked right at it. I felt stupid for getting spooked by shadows, so I forced myself to go back inside. By dawn, we were already packing up. Alex was reluctant to go deeper into the monument, but Sarah and I insisted it would be quicker to find a water source closer to the center instead of backtracking. He didn't argue much, just kept messing with the duct tape on his boots. We drove until we spotted a thin plume of smoke on the horizon. Someone else had to be out there, and they might know where to find water. As we got closer, the land turned more rugged. Deep cracks in the basalt forced us to park the RV and continue on foot. The smoke grew thicker, swirling up from behind a rocky ridge. By the time we realized something was wrong, it was way too late. The three of us crested the ridge and stared down into a shallow depression where about a dozen people stood around a large fire. The smell hit us first, burnt flesh. My stomach lurched when I saw a torn human arm skewered over the flames. The people in the circle wore ragged clothes, their faces smeared with ash or something else, and in the center stood a tall, wiry man with a shaved head and this terrible calmness in his eyes. Alex gasped, stumbling backward. That was enough noise to draw their attention. Every single head snapped toward us, eyes wide with something I can only describe as primal hunger. The tall man raised a bony hand, and they moved. Before I could react, hands grabbed me from behind, yanking me down the slope. Sarah screamed and Alex cursed, but it was chaos. A blow to my head sent my vision swimming. When I tried to get up, the butt of a makeshift spear cracked across my jaw. Darkness swallowed me. I came to a cage made of metal poles and rusted fencing. My wrists were tightly bound, my head was pounding, and my mouth felt like sandpaper. Sarah was slumped beside me, her face bruised. Alex was nowhere to be seen. I dragged myself toward the front of the cage. We were inside some kind of crude encampment, half hidden by walls of piled stone. A foul stench hung in the air. Over a sputtering fire, I saw chunks of meat roasting. My stomach churned with horror. A voice interrupted my revulsion. "You're awake." It came soft, almost gentle. The tall man stood outside the cage, arms folded. His eyes glittered with a deranged intelligence. "I am Father Cyrus. You wandered into our domain. There is a price for trespass." Sarah groaned, rubbing her wrists. "Where's Alex?" she demanded, her voice shaky. Father Cyrus's lips parted in a thin smile. He was uncooperative. He turned his head, signaling one of the cult members. A terrified cry echoed from somewhere behind a rock formation, followed by a sickening thud. Then silence. Sarah slumped forward, sobbing. I felt my rage boil, but there was nothing I could do. Hands tied and weapons out of reach. Father Cyrus gestured to a few of his followers and gave some muffled instructions I couldn't hear. Then he looked back at me. "You'll witness our rites soon," he said, "but not tonight. Tonight you rest and reflect on your role here." They left us with one guard, a hulking figure whose face was hidden behind a bandana. Hours crawled by. I tested the fence, feeling for a weak point. The metal poles were sunk deep into the ground, but the fence's wires were rusted. Maybe with enough force, I could snap a portion loose. I looked at Sarah. She was shaking but conscious. "I have a small blade," I whispered, nodding toward my boot. They'd taken our obvious gear, but sometimes captors don't think to check everything. Sure enough, a tiny razor, sharp knife was still strapped inside my boot's liner. Sarah sidled over, and I carefully worked my wrists around to grab it. It took every ounce of patience I had not to show my panic, not to let the guard notice. Eventually, I felt the ropes begin to fray. I managed to cut myself free, then slipped the knife to Sarah. When night fell, the cult seemed to relax their guard. Some left the camp, while others dozed by the fire. Our own guard's head started to dip. I took my chance. I stood up, rattling the cage just enough to make him steer. As he approached, I lunged through the bars and rammed my shoulder into his face. The impact sent him stumbling. He grabbed for his spear, but Sarah lashed out through the fence with the knife, slicing his arm. He roared in pain. In that instant, I hooked my fingers through a section of the rusted wire and yanked with all my strength. It tore loose in a shriek of bending metal. Sarah scrambled out first. I followed close behind. We sprinted through the darkness, weaving between jagged outcrops. Shouts erupted behind us, and I heard heavy footsteps. My heart was pounding, my lungs burning from the thin desert air. We ducked behind a large basalt boulder, trying to catch our breath. "Why have to find Alex?" Sarah said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I glanced around, scanning for any sign of him. The memory of that single awful cry echoed in my mind. I wasn't sure if he was even alive. Still, I nodded. "We'll try, but if we can't..." She cut me off with a trembling hand. "He saved me from..." Her voice broke. She didn't finish. Staying low to the ground, we crept along the perimeter of the encampment. The cultists had their main fire in the center, torches stuck in the ground around it. Huddled tents and makeshift huts lined the edges. I spotted a smaller fire pit behind one of the huts. We moved in that direction, hoping not to be seen. That's when we found Alex. He lay crumpled on the dirt, face down, his shirt stained dark with blood. My stomach flipped. Sarah let out a choked sob. I knelt beside him and turned him over. His eyes were open but blank. He was gone. As quietly as we could, we eased him down. It was all we could do to keep from crying out in grief. Footsteps suddenly rounded the corner of a hut, and a cultist spotted us. He shouted, raising a machete. Before he could strike, I tackled him, wrestling the weapon free. Sarah gasped as the man clawed at my face, shrieking incoherently. I slammed the blade's hilt into the side of his head. He went limp, collapsing on top of me. She helped me push the unconscious man off. "Come on," she whispered urgently, tears glistening in her eyes. "We can't stay here." We ran again, threading through the maze of tents. Torches flared, and angry voices filled the camp. They knew we'd escaped. We circled around to where we thought the entrance might be, some kind of path leading out. Instead, we found ourselves in a dead-end corridor of stacked stones. Father Cyrus stood there, flanked by 2 guards. His eyes burned with malevolent calm. "Running is foolish," he said. "This land hungers. The flesh we offer is a tribute, a sacred bond. You cannot leave." We tried to back away, but the other cultists surged in behind us. A scuffle broke out. Sarah slashed at one attacker with the knife while I swung the machete. It was chaos. Father Cyrus seemed almost amused. He moved slowly, like he had all the time in the world, while the rest of his group advanced on us in a frenzy. Suddenly, Sarah lunged at Father Cyrus. He sidestepped her with inhuman speed, grabbing her arm and sending her tumbling to the ground. I rushed him with the machete, but a blow to my ribs sent me sprawling. Pain shot through my side. I locked eyes with Sarah, who looked up at me with terror. I tried to stand, but a cultist grabbed me from behind. That's when Sarah did something I never anticipated. She swung her knife at me. It glanced off my shoulder. A shallow cut, but the betrayal stung worse than any wound. I stumbled, shock freezing my thoughts. Before I could react, she spun to Father Cyrus and spoke in a frantic voice. "If I bring him back, do I get to leave? Do I get to live?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My vision blurred with confusion and pain. Father Cyrus smiled in that eerie way again. "Wes, child," he said. "Deliver him, and you'll be spared." She turned toward me, her eyes wild, tears streaking her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, lifting her knife again. I had no time to be angry or feel hurt. Instinct took over. I smashed the guard restraining me in the face with my elbow, then kicked Sarah's arm aside as she tried to stab me. The machete was still in my hand, so I swung wildly, forcing Father Cyrus and the cultists to step back. That second of space let me slip away, pain radiating through my torso. I ran, heart pounding so loud it was all I could hear. Behind me, Father Cyrus yelled for them to chase me, but I was already ducking between the huts. I heard Sarah's anguished cry, though I couldn't tell if it was from anger or regret. Navigating by moonlight, I sprinted through the encampment, ignoring the shooting pain with every breath. I nearly tripped over a low fence as I made my way outside the ring of tents. A cultist spotted me, but I slashed at him with the machete, catching him off guard. He fell, howling in pain. I kept running until I could no longer hear shouts, until the flickering torches vanished behind a ridge. The sky above was awash of pale starlight, and I found shelter in a jagged lava tube entrance. Only then did I realize how badly I was shaking. My shoulder throbbed where Sarah had cut me, and my ribcage felt bruised, if not fractured. For hours, I huddled in that tube, wrestling with my mind. Alex was dead. Sarah had betrayed me, though I wasn't sure if she'd done it out of terror or genuine malice. The cult was still out there, likely searching for me, and I was alone, with limited water, bleeding and rattled by fatigue. Dawn crept in slowly, a weak, gray light filling the sky. I knew I couldn't just leave Sarah, no matter what she'd done. If she truly bargained with the cult, maybe she was lost. But if she regretted it, if Father Cyrus was forcing her into some twisted ritual, I couldn't ignore that. Maybe I was a fool. Maybe it was my old paramedic instincts, but I had to try. I spent some time searching for rocks I could use as weapons. I found a sturdy branch that might serve as a makeshift spear. It felt flimsy in my hands, but it was better than nothing. I tore off a piece of my shirt and wrapped it around my wounded shoulder, gritting my teeth at the sting. Moving through the lava fields with caution, I made my way back to the cult's encampment. I crept around boulders and ridges until I spotted the huts. Thick smoke rose from the main fire. The smell was nauseating, burnt hair and flesh. I swallowed my revulsion, focused on one goal: find Sarah. Peeking around a pile of rocks, I saw about 6 cultists gathered in the center. They were chanting in low voices, and Father Cyrus stood over a wooden platform. Tied to one end of the platform was Sarah. She looked conscious but drugged, her eyes rolling, mouth slack. She'd clearly lost a lot of blood. A deep gash ran across her forearm. Sparks flew from the fire as Father Cyrus raised a long blade, chanting words I couldn't make out. The other cultists began to sway. The moment was now or never. I clutched my spear branch in one hand and the machete in the other, heart hammering. I charged. The first cultist I reached was so shocked he barely turned before I slammed the branch into his stomach. I bashed him aside, then swung the machete at another. Father Cyrus spun around, a snarl contorting his face. Sarah moaned softly, still bound on the platform. Shouts erupted from all sides, cultists scrambling for weapons. I kicked over a blazing torch, spilling embers into the dry brush. Flames flickered upward, smoke billowing, confusing them, giving me precious seconds. Father Cyrus lunged at me, blade slicing through the smoke. I parried with the machete. Our weapons clanged, and the force of his strike nearly knocked me over. His strength was inhuman, fueled by madness or something worse. My arms trembled as I pushed back. Somehow, I twisted free of his blade and kicked out, catching him in the knee. He stumbled, eyes bulging with rage. I hacked downward, and he barely dodged. A flame licked at the edge of his robe, causing him to jerk away. Seizing the opening, I raced to the platform and sawed frantically at the ropes binding Sarah. She groaned, her gaze distant, barely recognizing me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't want to die. The ropes came free. I helped her slide off the platform, supporting her with my arm. Behind me, Father Cyrus roared, ordering his remaining followers to attack. Fire spread rapidly through the camp, turning tents into blazing torches. The cultists coughed, eyes stinging from the smoke. We had to get out of there, but Father Cyrus blocked our path. He raised his blade again, your eyes locked on me. Time seemed to slow. I thrust Sarah behind me, gripping the machete with both hands. He struck with terrifying speed, but I managed to deflect it. I swung low, feeling the machete bite into flesh. He howled, dropping to one knee. He looked up at me, blood staining the ground, that awful calm replaced by a rabid fury. You cannot kill what has already been reborn, he spat, lunging for me. I sidestepped, using his momentum against him. He stumbled face first into the raging fire next to the wooden platform. He screamed, thrashing as flames raced over skin. The sounds he made were beyond human. Acrid smoke filled the air. I yanked Sarah away, and we fled, ignoring the Chiaz behind us. We sprinted across the basalt fields, stumbling over fissures. Cultists scattered in the background, some on fire, others trying to extinguish the blaze devouring their camp. By the time we reached the RV, the sun was high and our throats burned with thirst. Sarah's wound bled heavily, so I used my meager medical skills to bandage her as best I could. She was pale, trembling. She kept apologizing, delirious from blood loss. I laid her on the RV's small couch and checked my supplies. We had barely any clean water, but I gave her what I could, pressing a wet cloth to her forehead. I started the engine, praying it would run. The RV sputtered but came to life. I drove as fast as the terrain allowed, not stopping until I reached a paved road. Hours later, Sarah's condition worsened. She was too weak to stay awake, mumbling incoherently about nightmares. I kept driving, pain radiating through my ribs, ignoring the dizziness creeping over me. Eventually, I found my way back to Grant's, pulling into the parking lot of a small hospital. The staff rushed out to help, and I collapsed at their feet, exhaustion and relief washing over me in equal measure. By the time I regained full consciousness, a nurse told me that Sarah was in critical condition. She'd lost a lot of blood. The nurse asked about our injuries, how we got them, but I only gave vague answers. I knew no one would believe the full story, or if they did, they'd think I was insane. The cult, Father Cyrus, Alex's fate. It felt like some horrific fever dream. Sarah never left that hospital. She died 2 days later, barely coherent until the end. In her final moments, she reached for my hand, whispering, "I didn't want to betray you. I couldn't face them. Forgive me." I squeezed her hand and told her everything would be all right, even though we both knew it wasn't true. She died holding my hand, tears still on her cheeks. Weeks after, I sat in a roadside diner, staring at my coffee cup. On the TV behind the counter, a news report mentioned hikers gone missing in El Malpais. I felt a chill run through me. I looked at my reflection in the window, and for a fraction of a second, I could have sworn I saw Father Cyrus's twisted smile staring back. I closed my eyes. The memory of that encampment haunted me. Alex's body, the smell of burning flesh, and Sarah's final apology. I still don't know what truly lurked in that cursed patch of New Mexico desert or why, but I do know I won't forget it, no matter how far I drive or how many lonely roads I follow. Some horrors stain the soul forever, and in that reflection, I felt the stain like a brand. I paid my bill, left the diner, and started up my RV again. I'm still on the road, searching for a place that might finally feel safe. But I doubt I'll ever truly outrun the screams and the smoke of El Malpais. Even now, as I write this, I can still smell the ashes. My name's Alex Reed. I'm 28, And what I'm about to tell you went down in late September, 2 years back, up at Killdeer Mountain in North Dakota. It was supposed to be this awesome, romantic camping trip for my girlfriend, Sarah's birthday. Spoiler alert, it turned into a total freaking nightmare. Sarah was all about nature and spooky stuff, always going on about local legends and myths. She was obsessed with Killdeer Mountain, kept talking about how Native American tribes considered it sacred ground and all that spiritual jazz. I was like, whatever. I didn't really buy into all the ghost stories and, those skinwalker rumors. But she was into it, so I figured, why not? I wanted to make her happy. I had no idea how real or how dangerous those legends could be. I borrowed a bunch of camping gear from my buddy Chris. He said it was pretty good, but the dude's definition of pretty good is seriously messed up. Turns out most of this stuff was ancient and falling apart. The tent zipper was jammed like half the time, and the little portable stove was missing parts. We should have just turned around then, honestly. Anyway, we drove up from Bismarck to Killdeer early that morning. We wanted to get there before dark. The sun was already setting by the time we found a decent spot to pitch our tent at the base of the mountain. Of course, setting up the tent was a whole ordeal. The instructions were faded to nothing, and the pole segments weren't even labeled. Sarah was cracking jokes about how we should have just splurged on a motel, but I could tell she was still stoked to be there. Eventually, we got the tent up. I managed to get a small fire going while Sarah unrolled our sleeping bags. That first night, I remember feeling this chill that had nothing to do with the actual temperature. It was weird, like a bone, deep coldness. We were sitting by the fire, laughing about something stupid, when this hobo echoed through the trees. It was messed up. It didn't sound like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. I mean, I've heard those before and they have like a distinct call. This was deeper, almost more human. It made my skin crawl. Sarah just brushed it off, said it was probably just a weird sounding coyote. But something in my gut was screaming that it wasn't. We turned in for the night, and I tried to sleep, but I was on edge, Every little rustle of leaves, every gust of wind made me jump. Sarah, she passed out right away, breathing all steady and calm. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and sunlight was filtering through the tent. We stepped outside, and that's when we saw them, these weird footprints all around our campsite. They were HUGE, way bigger than any boot print I'd ever seen. And the toes, they were all long and pointy, almost like claws. Super creepy. Sarah tried to play it cool, saying it was probably just some big animal or a wolf with messed up feet, but neither of us really bought it. We tried to shake it off and just go about our day, We went for a hike on one of the trails nearby. The view from the ridge was insane. All these wide, open plains rolling into farmland in the distance. It made us feel tiny. That evening, we had a hell of a time getting the fire started. Our lighter was almost out of fluid, and the backup matches were damp. After a whole lot of cursing and trying to improvise with dry grass, we finally got some embers going. We cooked up some basic food and settled in for the night. And that's when things really started to get weird. That's when the second strange event occurred. So, like I was saying, we finally got the fire going again that second night, and things were starting to feel a little more normal. I was sitting outside, just kind of letting the warmth of the dying fire soak in, enjoying the peace and quiet, or so I thought. Then I heard it, Sarah's voice, calling my name from out in the woods. The thing is, Sarah was right next to me inside the tent, rummaging around for extra blankets. I called back to her, "Sarah," and she poked her head out, looking all confused. She hadn't said a word. Someone or something out there was mimicking her voice. A chill went straight down my spine. I grabbed the flashlight, my heart pounding, and started scanning the tree line. The beam was flickering weak as hell. The batteries were on their last legs naturally. Sarah came out and stood beside me, and we both just listened. Dead silence. I told her what I'd heard, and you could see the fear creeping into her eyes. We decided to just lock ourselves in the tent for the night. We were hoping we were just being paranoid, letting our imaginations run wild. But sleep, forget about it. I was a wreck. Then, in the middle of the night, I heard it, this scratching sound on the outside of the tent. It was slow and deliberate, like something was dragging its claws down the fabric. I held my breath, reaching for the flashlight, but then Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror. The sound circled around the tent, like whatever it was testing the walls, seeing if it could get in. Then, just like that, it stopped. Morning brought a seriously messed up discovery. About 20 feet from our tent, we found a bunch of dead rabbits all torn up. It was gruesome, man, the most messed up thing I'd ever seen. The ground was stained with blood, and the smell of it was horrific. Sarah looked like she was going to puke. We knew right then we had to get out of there. We packed up our camp faster than I thought humanly possible and decided to hike closer to the car. Maybe find a new spot that wasn't so isolated. But after walking for maybe 2 miles, Sarah dug in her heels. She wanted to stay. I know, right? She was fascinated by all the weird stuff that had been happening, the footprints, the howls, everything. She wanted to document it, figure out what kind of creature was out there. I argued with her, told her we needed to get the hell out of there, back to the city. But her curiosity, it was like it overrode any fear she had. I was torn. Part of me just wanted to protect her, and if staying made her feel in control, maybe it was worth it. But deep down, I knew this was a bad idea. This was dangerous. We ended up finding another clearing near this rocky outcrop. While we were setting up the tent, again we argued some more. Sarah wanted to go exploring, and I was just desperate to keep a low profile until morning, then head home. She accused me of being scared. I told her, yeah, I am scared, and maybe you should be too. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. That night, the wind picked up, howling across the slopes of Killdeer Mountain. Our new camp felt a little safer, but I was still a nervous wreck. Around midnight, stones started landing near our tent. At first, I thought it was just the wind dislodging them from the outcrop, but then they started hitting the tent directly. Something was throwing them. Then came this low, guttural noise, half laugh, half growl. It was chilling. Man, Sarah unzipped the tent flap and shined the flashlight out. We saw it then, this tall, dark silhouette perched on a large rock. At first, it looked human, but then it moved, all jerky and unnatural, dropping down onto all fours. I couldn't make out any details, but its eyes reflected orange in the flashlight beam. It let out this hiss, then bounded away into the darkness. That was it. We were done. I told Sarah we had to leave right then and there, but she said it was too dark. We could get lost or injured. I was furious that she'd let her fascination keep us here this long. But she was right about one thing. Hiking out at night was risky. Our best bet was to hunker down and leave at sunrise. I barely slept again. Sometime in the early hours, I think I just passed out from pure exhaustion. When I woke up, the sun was already filtering through the tent. I felt a little better, thinking that maybe, just maybe, we could get out of there without anything else happening. But then I realized Sarah was gone. I crawled out of the tent, calling her name. The campsite looked undisturbed, but then I saw them, footprints leading away, the same clawed imprints we'd seen before. Panic set in, a cold dread washing over me. I shouted for Sarah until my voice was raw, then started scouring the area, following the trail of footprints. About a quarter-mile away, I found her scarf. It was snagged on a low, hanging branch. Beneath it, the grass was all flattened, like there had been a struggle. And there was blood, splotches of it on the rocks nearby. My heart was hammering in my chest. I felt like I was going to be sick, but I kept going. I had to find her. I followed what looked like a drag trail. Every cell in my body was buzzing with terror. I should have turned back. I know I should have. But I just couldn't. The trail led me to the mouth of a cave I hadn't noticed before. It was narrow, hidden by shrubs and boulders. I paused, listening, and then I heard it, a faint, muffled whimper coming from inside. It sounded like Sarah. I squeezed through the tight entrance. The air inside was damp and stale, and the cave walls glistened with moisture. My flashlight was flickering, but it gave off just enough light to see a passage leading deeper into the darkness. Fear was choking me, but I forced myself to keep going. I turned a corner, and there she was. Sarah was lying on the cave floor, her hands tied behind her back. Her face was smudged with dirt, and there was a thin trickle of blood running from her temple. I rushed to her side, fumbling with the ropes, my hands shaking like crazy. But before I could get her free, I heard that same guttural laugh echo from behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the darkness. At first, I saw a man tall and lean, with limbs that seemed too long, almost unnatural. His eyes reflected the light, just like the creature on the rock. But then he shifted. It was like his bones were rearranging themselves beneath his skin. There was this sickening popping sound. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The legends, they were real. A skinwalker. The creature lunged at me, knocking the flashlight out of my hand. We wrestled in the dark, its nails raking across my arm, drawing blood. It felt like fighting a wild animal. I managed to grab a rock and smash it against what I think was its head. It howled, this unearthly pain-filled shriek, and stumbled back. I scrambled back to Sarah, found the flashlight on the ground, and picked it up. Its beam cut through the darkness barely, just enough to see the creature glaring at us. I saw Sarah's eyes widen with horror. I yanked at the ropes on her wrists, finally getting them loose. She gasped for breath, coughing. We had to get out of there. We tried to run for the exit, but the skinwalker blocked our path. It was making this clicking sound that sent chills down my spine. It charged again, grabbing my ankle. I kicked out wildly, connecting with its midsection. Sarah scrambled to her feet and disappeared into the dark corridor leading back toward the cave entrance. The creature raked its claws across my leg, and I yelled out in pain. Desperate, I swung the flashlight, smashing it against the creature's face. The light blinked out, plunging us into total darkness. I heard the skinwalker screech again, then it skittered away, its footsteps echoing along the walls. I used the cave wall for support, staggering forward, trying to find my way out. The passage twisted and turned, and I was completely disoriented. Then I heard Sarah's voice again. She sounded frantic, calling my name. I followed her voice, ignoring the throbbing pain in my leg. My free hand brushed against damp stone, and then, there she was, her silhouette at the entrance of the cave. We burst out into the daylight, half crawling over the rocks. I collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air, my lungs burning. Sarah knelt beside me, tears streaming down her face. She kept saying we had to run, that we had to get as far away from this mountain as possible. Sarah tried to pull me up, but my leg was throbbing, bleeding pretty badly. I was weak, exhausted. I draped my arm over her shoulder, and together, we limped away from that cursed cave, a desperate, staggering retreat. We finally reached our campsite, only to find it totally ransacked. Our bags were torn open, supplies scattered everywhere. It was like a wild animal had gone through it. The car was parked about a mile down the trail. We figured if we could just reach it, we could drive to safety. But as we started toward the path, Sarah stopped dead in her tracks. Something was wrong. I could see it in her eyes. They were distant, unfocused. Liam, she said, her voice strange, almost hollow. I need to go back. I froze. Go back? Are you crazy? We need to get to the car. She looked at me with this eerie calm. It's calling me, she whispered. I can hear it. A chill, colder than anything I'd felt before, gripped me. I remembered the skinwalker's voice imitation. Could it have done something to her? Possessed her somehow? My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to reason with her, reminding her of what we'd just been through, the cave, the creature, her injuries. But she just shook her head, stepping away from me. I grabbed her arm. I was going to drag her if I had to. But she twisted free, her eyes shining with a strange, unnatural glow. For a second, I thought I saw them flicker orange, just like the creature's. She clutched my shirt and hissed, "Let me go." The voice was hers, but layered with something else, something inhuman. I was so terrified I stumbled backward. Sarah's face flickered with emotion, anger, confusion, then pure terror. She pressed her hands against her temples, like she was fighting some invisible force inside her head. Then, in a moment of agonizing clarity, she said, "Run, Alex. I can't fight it much longer." Everything inside me screamed not to leave her, but she pushed me away, tears mingling with that unearthly glow in her eyes. And then she ran. She ran toward the tree line, back into the wilderness. I shouted her name, but she didn't stop. My leg was screaming in pain, and I could barely stand. I tried to follow, but each step was agony. After a few agonizing strides, I collapsed. My body just refused to go any further. I pounded the ground, feeling helpless, furious, and heartbroken. The wind rustled through the pines overhead, a mournful sound. Sarah was gone. My heart was wrenched with guilt as I forced myself to move, to hobble toward the car. I hated myself for leaving her, but in that moment, I truly believed she was beyond my help. Whatever was controlling her was stronger than me, stronger than my love, stronger than reason. The trail back to the car felt like it stretched on for an eternity. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth made me jump, expecting the skinwalker to burst out of the bushes and finish what it started. Miraculously, I reached the car without another encounter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Once inside, I locked the doors, started the engine, and sped down that dirt road. Tears blurring my vision, it took over an hour to reach the nearest town. It was tiny, just a speck on the map. I barged into a gas station, demanding to use the phone to call for help. A sheriff's deputy arrived, and I poured out my whole insane story. He looked skeptical, probably thought I was some kind of lunatic. But he must have seen the genuine terror in my eyes, the dried blood on my clothes, on my leg. He radioed for more officers and a search team. I spent days in a local hospital, recovering from my leg wounds. The deputy organized a search party for Sarah. I wanted to go with them, but the doctors wouldn't let me. I was in no shape to go anywhere. By the time they came back, they told me they found nothing. No trace of Sarah, no cave, no sign of a struggle. Their only lead was my statement and the destroyed campsite. Some of them whispered that I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, that Sarah had just run off. Others nodded grimly, like they'd heard rumors about Killdeer Mountain before, but didn't want to admit it. The day after I was discharged from the hospital, I tried to return to the area with a local guide. We searched for hours, but nothing looked familiar. The trails twisted in ways I didn't recognize, and the thick undergrowth seemed to have swallowed every sign of the cave, of anything. At one point, we found a ravine that seemed vaguely similar, but there was no cave entrance in the rock face. Weeks turned into months. I went back home to Bismarck, but I plastered missing person posters everywhere. I emailed every local ranger station, every park official, hoping for a lead. Nothing. Nobody had reported seeing a woman who matched Sarah's description. The sheriff's department eventually closed the case due to lack of evidence. People whispered behind my back, hinting that I must have done something to Sarah. The reality is worse than any suspicion. I know what I saw. I know what took her. Sometimes I dream of her voice, calling my name, just like that night in the tent. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, afraid that if I answer, I'll invite that thing into my life again. I haven't given up, though. I still comb through local legends about skinwalkers and shapeshifters. I've talked to elders from nearby reservations. Some won't speak of it at all, warning that even mentioning such beings draws them closer. Others have shared hushed tales of people who wandered too far from the beaten path and vanished. or return changed, not themselves anymore. The consistent message is that once you attract the attention of a skinwalker, it's almost impossible to escape. I visit Killdeer Mountain every year on the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance. I search for any clue, any sign that she might still be alive, or at least at peace. All I ever find are the same wide open plains and silent forests that haunt my nightmares. But I can't stop looking. No matter how fruitless it seems, I have to keep trying. My name is Alex Reed. I'm 28 years old. I survived Killdeer Mountain, but Sarah didn't. Or at least, not in any way I recognize. If you ever find yourself in the remote stretches of North Dakota, near that sacred mountain, heed my warning. There are things in the wilderness that defy explanation. They can mimic your voice, twist your loved ones against you, and lure you into the dark. And they don't like to let go once they've set their sights on you. That's my story, and it's as real as the scars on my leg and the emptiness in my chest. Sarah's still out there, or maybe she's gone forever. Every night, I pray I'll hear her voice just one more time. Except now, I'm never sure if it would truly be her, or the skinwalker, using her voice to finally finish what it started.